The desert remembers what men try to forget. Winter in Arizona doesn't fall gentle like snow elsewhere. It scrapes across the land with teeth of ice and claws of wind, exposing secrets buried shallow in dust and denial. Blood spilled here doesn't wash away. It sinks into the earth, a stain that spreads beneath the surface where no one can see it. Until someone starts digging. A rifle shot echoes across the empty plains. A single bullet fired at a wolf finds a different target. In that moment, as blood seeps into thirsty soil, two broken lives collide. A widow haunted by ghosts of her own making, and a warrior carrying the weight of 43 unmarked graves. They say copper is the new silver in these parts. Worth killing for, worth dying for, worth erasing entire bloodlines to possess. But some truths refuse to stay buried, and some sins demand a reckoning that no amount of money can prevent. In a land where justice comes from the barrel of a gun, mercy is the most dangerous choice of all. Winter in the Arizona desert came not with softness, but with teeth. The wind scraped across Sarah Blackwood's face as she stepped onto her porch, her breath forming ghosts that disappeared too quickly. The sky hung low and colorless like spent coals after a fire that had offered no warmth. She pulled her coat tighter. The wool scratched against her neck, but she welcomed the discomfort. It reminded her she could still feel something. Her homestead stretched before her 50 acres of cracked earth that had once promised prosperity. Now it offered only silence and the occasional mocking whisper of wind through the empty barn. 2 horses remained in the corral alongside 3 goats that provided just enough milk to keep her from riding into town more than necessary. The cattle had dwindled to 7 emaciated creatures that huddled together against the cold. Sarah's fingers traced the rough wood of the porch railing. Splinters threatened her skin, but she didn't mind. The physical pain was preferable to what waited inside her mind when the nights grew too quiet. The rifle leaned against the wall beside her constant companion and last friend. She'd cleaned it that morning as she did every morning, removing dust from the barrel with the same methodical care she'd once used to brush her daughter's hair. The gun held 5 rounds. She needed only 1, but loaded all 5 out of habit, a habit formed when hope still existed that tomorrow might be different. A crow landed on the fence post nearest the house, its black eyes studying her with ancient indifference. Sarah stared back. The bird tilted its head, opened its beak, but made no sound. Nothing to say. Sarah's voice cracked from disuse. "Smart bird." Her words scattered in the wind, lost to the vastness of the desert. The crow launched into flight, black wings beating against the gray sky. Sarah reached for the rifle, the familiar weight settling into her hands. The wooden stock bore the marks of years' scratches, dents a small carving near the trigger guard. M.B. Matthew Blackwood. Her husband's initials carved during better days when they'd first claimed this land. Before the mine dried up. Before the fever took Emily. Before Matthew walked into the barn one spring morning and put a bullet through his temple. Sarah's index finger rested alongside the trigger guard, not inside it. Not yet. That was a line she hadn't crossed, though she'd stood at its edge more nights than she could count. Movement caught her eye, a dust cloud rising in the distance. Instinctively she raised the rifle, peering through the iron sights. A coyote, perhaps, or a wandering traveler who would be wise to keep wandering. But then came the sound, a high, terrified bellow that sent Sarah running. One of her cattle was under attack. Her boots pounded across the hard-packed earth, rifle clutched against her chest. She ran past the well, past the deadened garden plot toward the northern fence line where her small herd grazed on what little winter grass remained. The cattle had scattered all but one. A young heifer thrashed on the ground, dark blood spreading beneath it, staining the pale dust crimson. Above it stood not a coyote, but something larger, a wolf, its muzzle already red. Sarah raised her rifle in one fluid motion. The stock pressed against her shoulder, familiar as a lover's touch. She drew a slow breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. The sound shattered the desert silence. The wolf jerked, then bolted, a streak of gray against the barren landscape. "Damn it!" Sarah spat, working the lever to chamber another round. She tracked the wolf's movement, leading it slightly with her barrel. The second shot cracked across the plains. The wolf stumbled but kept running, disappearing into a ravine. Sarah followed her stride, purposeful. The heifer was already dead. She couldn't save it, but she could ensure its killer didn't return for another. Her boots slid on loose stones as she descended into the ravine, a jagged tear in the earth that carved its way through her property. Blood drops marked the wolf's path, small dark stars against the pale ground. Sarah followed them, moving cautiously now, rifle at the ready. The ravine deepened walls of stratified rock rising on either side, telling stories of ancient floods in a land now desperate for water. The blood trail turned, disappearing behind a cluster of boulders. Sarah paused, listening. No sound but the wind and her own heartbeat. She circled wide, approaching from the side rather than following directly. Years of hunting had taught her patience. She moved like water over stone, silent, inevitable. When she rounded the boulders rifle first, she expected to find the wolf wounded or dead. Instead, she found a man. He lay half concealed behind the rocks, one hand pressed to his side where blood seeped between his fingers. Dark hair fell across his face but couldn't hide the pain in his eyes, eyes that locked onto hers with a mixture of defiance and resignation. "Jesus Christ," Sarah whispered, the rifle wavering in her hands. The man didn't speak. His breathing came in shallow gasps, chest rising and falling too rapidly. Blood pooled beneath him, mixing with melting snow, spreading in rivulets across the stony ground. Sarah saw the knife at his belt, the worn moccasins, the intricate beadwork on his leather vest. Apache, one of the few who had evaded the reservations, the forced marches, the slow death of confinement. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The man's eyes never left hers. No plea, no fear, only a fierce, fading dignity that struck her like a physical blow. A memory flashed, Matthew's eyes empty and vacant, staring at nothing as blood spread beneath his fallen body. Sarah lowered the rifle. "I wasn't aiming for you," she said, the words tasting strange in her mouth. The man's lips moved, but no sound emerged. His hand slipped from the wound, revealing a ragged tear where her bullet had found him instead of the wolf. She should leave him. Turn around, walk away. Let nature take its course. That's what anyone in Silver Creek would tell her to do. Sheriff Harlow would give her a medal for it. Instead, Sarah slung the rifle over her shoulder and knelt beside him. "This is going to hurt," she said, though she doubted he understood. She tore a strip from her shirt and pressed it against the wound. The man's body went rigid, a hiss escaping between clenched teeth. Blood soaked through the makeshift bandage immediately. Too much blood. He wouldn't survive the hour without help. Sarah made her decision. "I'm going to move you," she said, meeting his gaze. "Fight me, and we both die out here." Understanding flickered in the man's eyes, or perhaps it was simply the fading of consciousness. Either way, he didn't resist when she hooked her arms beneath his shoulders and began to drag him toward her homestead. The journey was brutal. The man was heavy, and the climb out of the ravine nearly defeated her. Twice she had to stop, gasping for breath, her muscles screaming in protest. The third time she stopped, she noticed the man had lost consciousness, his head lolling against her arm. "Don't you die," she muttered, resuming her grim task. "Don't you dare die before I decide what to do with you." By the time she reached her barn, Sarah's coat was soaked with sweat despite the cold. She kicked open the door and hauled the man inside, laying him on a pile of hay in the corner furthest from the entrance. The barn smelled of dust and animals and the lingering ghost of tobacco. Matthew's pipe, a scent that refused to fade even after 2 years. Sarah ignored it, focusing instead on the wounded man before her. She cut away his vest and shirt with a knife, exposing the bullet wound. It was a clean hit, the entry wound a perfect dark circle just below his ribs on the right side. No exit wound, the bullet remained inside him. Sarah's hands trembled as she gathered what she needed: whiskey from the house needle and thread from her sewing box, clean rags, a pair of Matthew's old forceps from when he'd worked at the mine. The man remained unconscious as she cleaned the wound with whiskey. A mercy. He wouldn't feel her digging for the bullet. As she worked, Sarah felt a strange calm descend. This at least was straightforward. A problem she could solve with her hands, unlike the emptiness that had become her constant companion. Unlike the silence of her house at night, unlike the memory of Emily's small grave or Matthew's final choice. The bullet came free with a wet sound, a small, misshapen lump of lead that had nearly claimed another life. Sarah dropped it into a tin cup where it landed with a dull clink. She stitched the wound closed with neat, even sutures. Her mother had taught her to sew when she was 9 years old, insisting that a woman's worth lay partly in the evenness of her stitches. Sarah had hated those lessons then. Now she silently thanked her mother as she tied off the final knot. When she finished, she sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of the blood covering her hands and clothes. The man's blood. An Apache warrior's blood. "What the hell am I doing?" she whispered to the empty barn. No answer came. Just the soft breathing of the unconscious man and the distant sound of wind rattling the loose boards of the barn's western wall. Sarah stood, bones creaking in protest. She needed to clean herself, change her clothes. She couldn't be seen like this if anyone rode by. Not that anyone would. The Blackwood homestead had become a place people avoided like a cemetery or the site of a hanging. She looked down at the man one more time. In sleep, the hard lines of his face softened. He looked younger, perhaps 30. Old scars marked his chest and arms, evidence of a life lived under threat. "Don't die," she said again, though she wasn't entirely sure why she cared. "And don't make me regret this." Sarah awoke with a start, hand automatically reaching for the rifle beside her bed. Pale dawn light filtered through the thin curtains, casting ghostly shadows across the floor. For a moment she couldn't remember why her body ached as though she'd been trampled by horses. Then it came back to her. The wolf, the ravine, the wounded Apache. She rose quickly, pulled on her boots without bothering to lace them, and hurried to the barn. The man was awake. He sat with his back against the barn wall, one hand pressed to his bandaged side, the other holding her knife, the one she'd left carelessly beside him after cutting away his clothes. They stared at each other, neither moving. "I could have killed you in your sleep," he said, his English accented but clear. Sarah didn't reach for her rifle. "Why didn't you?" He studied her face, eyes dark and unreadable. "You stopped my bleeding. Bad manners to kill someone who saves your life." Despite everything, Sarah felt her lips twitch. "That's civilized of you." "I am civilized." No humor touched his face. "More than the men who hunt my people." The knife remained in his hand blade, catching the early light. Sarah glanced at it, then back to his face. "I need that back," she said. "I need to know why a white woman would help me." Sarah considered her answer. The truth was, she didn't entirely know herself. "I shot you by mistake. Seemed right to fix what I broke." The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. After a long moment, he extended the knife handle first. Sarah took it, careful not to make any sudden movements. "You have a name, Tahoe. That's not Apache." A flicker of something amusement perhaps crossed his face. "My mother named me for a lake she once saw. My father's people called me something else." Sarah nodded, not pressing further. Names were complicated things, she understood that better than most. "I'm Sarah Blackwood. This is my land." "Your land?" The words held no accusation, just a flatness that somehow cut deeper. Sarah didn't respond to that. "You need water, food. Then you need to go." "I will be gone by nightfall." She doubted it. The wound wasn't fatal, but it would weaken him for days. Still, she didn't argue. "There's a stream 1/2 mile east. Town's 10 miles southwest. Silver Creek. Don't go there." Tahoe's expression hardened at the town's name. "I know Silver Creek." Something in his tone made Sarah pause. "You've been there?" "No." His hand returned to his side, pressing against the bandage where a small spot of fresh blood had seeped through. "But I know what happened there." Sarah waited, but he offered nothing more. Fine. The less she knew about him, the better. She set down a canteen and a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Water. Jerky. It's all I can spare." Tahoe nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. "Why do you live alone, Sarah Blackwood?" The question caught her off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked her anything personal, anything that mattered. "That's not your concern," she said, her voice sharper than intended. "No," he agreed. But you asked my name. I asked yours. Now we exchange other truths." Sarah turned away, moving toward the barn door. "Rest. Be gone by sunset." She stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind her. The morning air was sharp with cold, the sky a pale, washed-out blue that promised no warmth. Her breath clouded before her face, then dissipated like so many unspoken words. She didn't go back to the house immediately. Instead, she walked to the small fenced plot behind the barn, 2 graves, one large, one small. No crosses marked them. Matthew had never been religious, and Sarah had lost whatever faith she'd possessed when they'd lowered Emily's tiny body into the ground. Just 2 mounds of earth with stones placed carefully on top to keep coyotes from digging. Sarah stood there, hands hanging empty at her sides. She'd run out of words for them years ago. Now she just came to stand to remember, to feel the weight of absence. After a while, she couldn't have said how long she turned back toward the house. As she rounded the barn, she saw movement through the half-open door. Tahoe stood unsteadily, one hand braced against the wall for support. He had managed to put on what remained of his shirt, though he'd left it unbuttoned over the bandage. His face was pale beneath the natural copper of his skin, his forehead sheened with sweat despite the cold. "You won't make it half a mile," Sarah said, not bothering to hide her irritation. Tahoe straightened, pride visibly overriding pain. "I have traveled wounded before. And you'll travel wounded again, just not today." Sarah sighed, already regretting what she was about to say. "Stay. One more night. Leave tomorrow if you can stand without shaking." Suspicion darkened his features. "Why?" Sarah had no good answer, so she gave him the practical one. "Because if you die on my property, I'll have to bury you. I've dug enough graves." Understanding passed between them, a current of shared knowledge about loss that needed no elaboration. Tahoe nodded slowly. "One night." "One night," Sarah echoed, wondering if she'd just made the worst mistake of her life, or if that milestone had already been passed long ago. By afternoon, fever had taken hold of Tahoe. Sarah found him shivering beneath the thin blanket she'd provided, his skin burning to the touch. The wound had become inflamed, angry red streaks extending outward from the stitches. Infection. She'd feared this. "Damn it all," she muttered, wringing out a cloth in cool water and placing it on his forehead. Tahoe's eyes opened at her touch, glassy and unfocused. "Anali," he murmured. "No," Sarah said. "Rest." His hand caught her wrist with surprising strength. "They came at dawn. Soldiers dressed as Navajo." Sarah went still. "What?" "Silver Creek. They wanted the mountains." His words slurred together, fever loosening his tongue. "The silver in the mountains." "There's no silver left," Sarah said. "The mine played out years ago." Tahoe's grip tightened. Not silver. Water. The springs. "They poisoned the village well first." A chill ran through Sarah that had nothing to do with the winter air. She had heard rumors, whispers in town about the Apache problem being resolved, about new claims being staked in the eastern foothills. She hadn't paid attention. Her world had narrowed to the boundaries of her own property, her own grief. "When?" she asked. 3 moons ago, 43 dead, women, children." Tahoe's eyes cleared briefly, focusing on her face with frightening intensity. "Your husband's company, Silver Creek Mining." Sarah pulled her wrist free. "My husband is dead. Has been for 2 years. His brother isn't." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Nathan Blackwood, Matthew's older brother, who had never approved of their marriage, who had called Emily half-wild with thinly veiled contempt, who had offered to buy her land after Matthew's death for far less than it was worth. "Nathan wouldn't—" she began, then stopped. The truth was, she didn't know what Nathan was capable of. After Matthew's suicide, she'd cut ties with his family, refused their grudging offers of assistance. Tahoe's eyes slipped closed again, his hand falling limply to his side. 43. He repeated the word, barely audible. Sarah sat back on her heels, mind racing. This changed things. If what Tahoe said was true, if Nathan was involved in some kind of massacre disguised as tribal warfare, then harboring this man wasn't just dangerous, it was potentially fatal. She should turn him in, take him to town, hand him over to Sheriff Harlow, wash her hands of the whole affair. But even as the thought formed, she knew she wouldn't do it. Something had awakened in her, something that had been dormant since she'd found Matthew in the barn, blood and brain matter splattered across the wall behind him. Curiosity, anger, a hunger for truth. She rose and went to the house, returning with her medical kit and a bottle of bourbon, the last of Matthew's stash. Tahoe didn't stir as she cleaned the wound again, her touch gentle despite the turmoil in her mind. The infection wasn't severe yet. If she could bring down the fever, keep the wound clean, he might recover without needing a doctor's care. A doctor. The thought sent another ripple of unease through her. Montgomery would know what to do, Matthew's former father-in-law from his first marriage, the town's only physician. He'd helped Sarah through Emily's fever and the dark months after Matthew's death. But if Nathan was involved in something sinister, who else in Silver Creek might be complicit? Sarah corked the bourbon and sat back, studying Tahoe's face. In sleep, pain had etched deep lines around his mouth and eyes. Not so young after all, a man who had seen his share of suffering. "Who are you, really?" she murmured. "And what am I supposed to do with you?" No answer came. Just the whisper of wind through the barn's walls and the soft, labored breathing of the wounded man before her. As dusk gathered outside, Sarah made her decision. She couldn't handle this alone. She needed Montgomery's help and his discretion. Tomorrow she would ride to Silver Creek and bring back the doctor. Until then, she would keep Tahoe as comfortable as possible and hope that his fever broke naturally. She settled on a stool near the barn door, rifle across her lap, prepared for a long night's vigil. If anyone came looking for Tahoe, they would have to go through her first. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, she felt strangely calm. For the first time in 2 years, she had a purpose beyond mere survival. Outside, snow began to fall, small, hard flakes that ticked against the barn's roof like tiny bullets. Sarah pulled her coat tighter and watched as darkness claimed the desert, transforming it into a vast emptiness where anything might be hidden, including the truth. Morning arrived reluctantly, the sun obscured by low, heavy clouds that promised more snow. Sarah had dozed fitfully throughout the night, waking at every sound, the creak of the barn settling, the soft nickering of horses, Tahoe's occasional murmurs in a language she didn't understand. His fever had neither worsened nor improved. He drifted in and out of consciousness, accepting water when she offered it, but unable to eat. Sarah stood in the barn doorway, watching as the first pale light crept across her property. The decision she'd made during the night still felt right, if dangerous. She would ride to Silver Creek, speak to Montgomery alone, bring him back to treat Tahoe properly. She returned to the house to prepare. First, she washed away the previous day's grime, scrubbing blood from beneath her fingernails. Then she changed into her town clothes, a faded blue dress that had once been nice, a wool coat that had belonged to her mother, boots polished as well as she could manage. Looking in the small mirror above her wash basin, Sarah hardly recognized herself. 2 years of isolation had weathered her face, carved lines around her eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before. Her brown hair, once her pride, hung limp and dull, despite her attempts to tame it into a knot at the nape of her neck. She looked away. Her appearance didn't matter, only her mission. Back in the barn, she knelt beside Tahoe. "I'm going for help," she said, unsure if he could hear her. "A doctor. Someone I trust." Tahoe's eyes opened surprisingly clear. "No one from Silver Creek can be trusted. Dr. Montgomery isn't like the others. He's a good man. There are no good men in towns built on stolen land." Sarah flinched. "He helped my family when no one else would." Tahoe studied her face. "Your choice," he finally said. "But if I am not here when you return, look for my body in the town square." The bluntness of his words unsettled her. "I won't let that happen." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You have a gun and a spine of iron, but they have greed and numbers." Sarah stood suddenly impatient. "I'll be back before midday. Try not to die while I'm gone." She saddled her mare Willow, a steady older horse that wouldn't spook easily if they encountered trouble. Before mounting, she checked her rifle, sliding it into the saddle holster where it would be within easy reach. A revolver, Matthew's Colt, went into her coat pocket. The ride to Silver Creek took longer than usual. The previous night's snow, though light, had made the trail slick in places. Sarah kept Willow at a careful walk, her mind churning with what she would say to Montgomery. The truth seemed safest. Not the whole truth, perhaps, but enough to secure his help without raising alarms. As she approached town, a familiar knot formed in her stomach, the same tension she felt on her infrequent supply runs. Silver Creek had once been home or close enough to it. Now it felt like enemy territory, a place where glances slid away from her, where conversations hushed when she entered a room. The widow Blackwood, the crazy woman who lived alone in the desert, the failure who couldn't save her husband from himself. The main street was quiet, most people still indoors on such a cold morning. Sarah rode directly to Montgomery's house at the eastern end of town, a modest two-story structure with a small sign announcing Dr. A. Montgomery, physician, hanging beside the door. She tied Willow to the hitching post and knocked 3 sharp raps that sounded too loud in the stillness. Montgomery himself answered, his white eyebrows rising in surprise. "Sarah, what brings you to town so early?" Despite his age, nearly 70, Montgomery remained a handsome man, tall and straight-backed, with a full head of white hair and piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes narrowed now as they took in Sarah's appearance. "You're in trouble," he said, not a question. "May I come in?" He stepped aside without hesitation, closing the door firmly behind her. The house smelled of coffee and medicine and old books, familiar scents that brought an unexpected lump to Sarah's throat. Montgomery led her to his study rather than his examination room, another sign of his perception. This wasn't a medical visit. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a worn leather chair. "Coffee." Sarah shook her head. "I don't have time." Montgomery sat across from her, those keen eyes never leaving her face. "Tell me." And so she did, carefully. About finding Tahoe wounded, about treating him, about his fever, and the infection she feared would worsen without proper care. She left out his accusations against Silver Creek Mining, against Nathan. Those were claims she needed to investigate herself before spreading. Montgomery listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he sat back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "You want me to treat an Apache warrior who may well have killed settlers in these parts," he said finally. "A man who by your own admission was armed and on your property without permission." "He wasn't there to hurt anyone," Sarah said. "He was passing through." "And you shot him?" "By accident. I was aiming for a wolf." Montgomery sighed, a sound laden with a weariness that seemed to go beyond the present situation. "Sarah, do you understand what you're asking? If anyone discovers I've helped this man, no one will know. I'm not asking you to hide him here. Just come to my place, treat him, leave. I'll handle the rest." "The rest being his escape back to whatever renegade band he belongs to." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "The rest being me ensuring he doesn't die from a wound I inflicted." Montgomery studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a small, sad curve of his lips. "You remind me of Catherine sometimes, that same stubborn sense of justice." Catherine. Matthew's first wife, Montgomery's daughter, dead in childbirth before Sarah had ever met Matthew, a ghost who had haunted their marriage in ways neither of them had fully acknowledged. "Will you help?" Sarah asked, ignoring the comparison. Montgomery rose, already moving toward his medical cabinet. "I'll gather my supplies. We should leave immediately if the infection is as you describe." Relief washed through Sarah. "Thank you." He paused, hand on the cabinet door. "Don't thank me yet. This could end badly for both of us. I know the risk." "No," Montgomery said, his voice suddenly hard. "I don't think you do. Silver Creek has changed, Sarah. There's a current running beneath the surface, something ugly and dangerous." Sarah thought of Tahoe's fever-racked words. They came at dawn, soldiers dressed as Navajo. "What do you mean?" Montgomery began, filling his medical bag, movements efficient despite his age. "The new mining company, Silver Creek Consolidated. They've brought in men from back east, hard men, and Sheriff Harlow answers to them now, not the town council." "Nathan's company," Sarah said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Nathan is just the local face. The money comes from elsewhere." Montgomery closed his bag with a decisive snap. "There's talk of a new strike. Not silver this time. Copper. The hills east of your property." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. East of her property, where the remaining Apache bands were rumored to camp. 43 dead, she murmured, Tahoe's words echoing in her mind. Montgomery's head jerked up. "What did you say?" Sarah hesitated, then decided to trust her instincts. "The Apache I'm helping. He said his village was attacked 3 months ago. 43 killed, women and children among them. And he blamed Silver Creek Consolidated." "Yes." Montgomery's face had gone very still. "Did he mention how they died?" "He said—" Sarah paused, suddenly aware of how outlandish it would sound. "He said men dressed as Navajo attacked at dawn, that they poisoned the village well first." To her surprise, Montgomery didn't dismiss the claim. Instead, he turned away, moving to the window to stare out at the snow-dusted street. "There were rumors," he said softly. "Bodies found in Dead Horse Canyon. I was asked to examine them officially to determine if disease had struck the Apache camp. Unofficially." He trailed off, shoulders sagging slightly. "What did you find?" Sarah asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Montgomery turned back to face her, his eyes haunted. "Signs of strychnine poisoning in the first bodies, gunshot wounds in the others. Those who tried to flee, I presume." Sarah felt sick. "And you said nothing." Anger flashed across Montgomery's face. "To whom Sheriff Harlow, who rides with the mine guards, Mayor Jenkins, who takes his orders from Nathan. I made my report, wrote the truth of what I found. The next day my office was broken into, the report stolen." He picked up his medical bag with a decisive movement. "I've been waiting for someone else to see what's happening here, to care enough to act." Sarah absorbed his words, understanding their implication. "I'm just trying to save one man's life." "Perhaps, but you've stumbled into something much larger." Montgomery donned his coat and hat. "Let's go. Your Apache friend can tell us more once we've treated his fever." As they stepped outside, Sarah noticed a group of men gathered outside the saloon across the street. One of them pointed in their direction, nudging his companion. "We're being watched," she murmured. Montgomery didn't look. "Harlow's deputies. They watch everyone these days." He helped Sarah mount Willow, then swung onto his own horse with surprising agility for his age. "Ride naturally. Don't hurry. We're just making a routine call to check on a widow's health." They set off at an unhurried pace, turning west toward the trail that would lead to Sarah's homestead. She could feel eyes on her back, but resisted the urge to look behind them. Only when Silver Creek had disappeared behind the first ridge did Montgomery speak again. "Your Apache friend, what's his name?" "Tahoe." Montgomery frowned. "That's not Apache." "So I told him." "And what did he say?" Sarah recalled Tahoe's words. That his mother named him for a lake she once saw. That his father's people called him something else. Montgomery pulled his horse to an abrupt halt. "A lake. You're certain he said a lake?" Sarah stopped beside him, puzzled by his reaction. "Yes. Why?" The doctor's face had gone pale beneath his weathered tan. 28 years ago, Nathan Blackwood and I traveled to Lake Tahoe on a business venture. Nathan became involved with a young Apache woman who worked at the lodge where we stayed. A cold certainty began to form in Sarah's mind. "What happened to her?" "She returned with us to Arizona. She was pregnant by then. Nathan kept her in a cabin outside town." Montgomery's voice had dropped to a near whisper. "The child was born the following spring, a boy. And the mother—" Montgomery's silence was answer enough. "You're saying Tahoe is Nathan's son?" Sarah said, the implications spinning out before her like cracks in ice. "I'm saying it's possible. The timing fits. And there's a resemblance, though you might not see it." Sarah thought of Tahoe's face, the proud nose, the set of his jaw. Had there been echoes of Nathan there, of Matthew? She hadn't been looking for them. "If you're right," she said slowly, "then Nathan attacked his own son's people." "If I'm right," Montgomery replied, "then Nathan has spent decades hiding the existence of his half-Apache son, a son who would have a legitimate claim to the Blackwood estate, including controlling interest in Silver Creek Consolidated." The pieces were falling into place with terrible clarity. "That's why you agreed to help so quickly. You knew who he might be." Montgomery nudged his horse forward again, not answering directly. "We should hurry. If his infection is advancing, we have no time to waste." They rode the rest of the way in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah's mind whirled with the implications of Montgomery's revelation. If Tahoe truly was Nathan's son, it changed everything, and explained the ferocity with which Nathan had tried to claim her land after Matthew's death. Land that bordered the eastern hills where the Apache made their camps. Land that might stand between Silver Creek Consolidated and its copper strike. As they crested the final rise and Sarah's homestead came into view, she felt a prickle of unease. Something was wrong. The barn door stood open, swinging slightly in the wind. She spurred Willow forward, heart pounding. Montgomery called after her, but she didn't slow. The barn was empty. The blanket lay crumpled where Tahoe had been spotted with blood. His few possessions were gone. Sarah stood in the center of the space, turning slowly. No signs of struggle, no indication that anyone had come for him. He had left on his own. "He's gone," she said when Montgomery entered. The doctor surveyed the scene, his expression grim. "Can you track him?" Sarah moved to the barn door, studying the ground outside. "In this," she gestured to the light covering of snow already marked with their horses' fresh tracks and partially melted in the weak winter sun. "I wouldn't know where to start." Montgomery set down his medical bag with a sigh. "Then we wait. He's wounded, fevered. He won't get far." Sarah wasn't so sure. There had been a determination in Tahoe, a core of strength that seemed to defy ordinary limits. "I need to know if you were telling the truth," she said, turning to face Montgomery. "About Nathan. About Tahoe being his son." Montgomery met her gaze steadily. "I delivered the boy myself. Attended his mother when she died of childbed fever 3 days later. Nathan wanted the infant sent to an orphanage in Phoenix. I convinced him to let a local Apache woman take him instead, a woman who had lost her own child that winter. And Nathan agreed. He provided money for a few years, then stopped. I assumed he'd forgotten about the boy, or chosen to forget." Sarah felt a surge of anger at Nathan at Matthew for never telling her this part of his family's history, at herself for being blind to the currents swirling around her homestead. "We need to find him," she said, "before someone else does." Montgomery nodded, but his expression was doubtful. "If he doesn't want to be found, we won't find him. The Apache know these hills better than any white man." A thought struck Sarah. "The bodies you examined, where exactly were they found?" "Dead Horse Canyon, about 5 miles east of here." "That's where he'll go," Sarah said, already moving toward Willow. "To see for himself." Montgomery caught her arm. "Sarah, think. If he is Nathan's son, if he discovers the truth about what happened to his people, what do you imagine he'll do?" The answer was obvious. Seek revenge. Against his own father, against Silver Creek. Montgomery's grip tightened. "And anyone who stands in his way." Sarah pulled free. "All the more reason to find him first." The doctor studied her face for a long moment, then nodded once. "I'll come with you." "No, go back to town, act normally. If anyone asks, say you treated me for female troubles." Montgomery's eyebrows rose. "And what will you do if you find him?" Sarah checked her rifle, ensuring it was loaded. "Convince him there's a better way to get justice than more bloodshed." "And if you can't?" She met his gaze steadily. "Then I'll do what needs to be done." Montgomery sighed suddenly, looking every one of his 70 years. Catherine would have done the same, so headstrong, so certain of right and wrong. Sarah mounted Willow, looking down at the old doctor. "This isn't about right and wrong anymore. This is about truth, and I intend to find it whatever it costs." As she rode away, heading east toward Dead Horse Canyon, Sarah felt a strange lightness despite the danger ahead. For 2 years she had existed rather than lived, haunting her own homestead like the ghost of the woman she had once been. Now purpose drove her forward, a mystery to solve, a life to save, perhaps her own as much as Tahoe's. Behind her the sun broke briefly through the clouds, casting her shadow long across the snow-dusted ground, a dark, determined shape moving steadily toward whatever waited in the eastern hills. Dead Horse Canyon earned its name honestly. At its entrance, the bleached skull of an equine grimaced from atop a weathered post, a marker and a warning. Beyond it, the walls rose steep and close, the floor littered with boulders that had crashed down during some long-ago tremor. Sarah dismounted, leading Willow carefully through the debris. The air hung still between the canyon walls, cold and dense with silence. No birds called. No insects hummed. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She hadn't been here in years. Matthew had warned her away from this place, claiming it was unstable, prone to rock slides. Now she wondered if there had been another reason for his caution. Tracks appeared in patches of remaining snow, a single set, uneven one footprint pressing deeper than the other, a wounded man moving with determination despite his pain. Sarah quickened her pace, leading Willow around a sharp bend in the canyon. The passage widened suddenly into a bowl-shaped clearing, and she stopped abruptly at the sight before her. Stones had been piled in the center of the clearing, not the random scatter of a rockfall, but deliberate arrangements. Dozens of them. Cairns, graves. Tahoe knelt before one of the smaller piles, his head bowed, one hand pressed against the stones. He didn't turn at Sarah's approach, though she made no effort to move silently. "You shouldn't have followed me," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. Sarah tied Willow to a stunted juniper that had somehow found purchase in the rocky soil. "You shouldn't have left. Your wound needs proper treatment." "This wound is nothing." Tahoe finally looked up, his face gaunt with fever, and something deeper, a grief so profound it seemed to have carved away at his very substance. 43. I counted the stones. Sarah moved closer, stopping a respectful distance from the graves. "Montgomery told me what he found. The signs of poisoning, the gunshot wounds." "Montgomery." Tahoe's expression hardened. "The doctor who writes truth in reports that disappear. He wanted to help you." "Why?" "Because he suspects who my father is." Tahoe rose unsteadily, facing her fully now. "Yes, I know. I have always known." The confirmation shouldn't have surprised Sarah, but it did. "Then you know why Nathan might want you dead." "I am the sin he cannot acknowledge, the blood he cannot wash away." Tahoe gestured to the cairns surrounding them. "But this is the sin he will answer for." Sarah saw something in his hand, then a small object that caught the weak sunlight, a medallion of some kind suspended from a leather cord. "What is that?" she asked. Tahoe held it up, a silver disc crudely stamped with a symbol she didn't recognize. "Apache medicine. To protect children." His voice roughened. "I found it on the smallest grave." Understanding dawned slowly. "You didn't live with these people?" "No. My mother's cousin took me in when I was orphaned. But I was sent away at 12. Too white for some tastes." No bitterness colored his words, just a statement of fact. "I returned when I heard about the massacre. Too late." "I'm sorry." Sarah said the words inadequate but sincere. Tahoe studied her face as if searching for mockery or falsehood. Finding neither, he nodded once. "What will you do now, Sarah Blackwood? Return to your empty house? Pretend you never found me?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Sarah felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge, her old life of isolation behind her, an unknown path ahead. "I want the truth," she said finally. "All of it. About Nathan. About what happened here." "Truth." Tahoe's laugh held no humor. "Truth dies easily in Silver Creek. Like my mother. Like these people." He gestured to the graves. "Then we make them listen," Sarah said, surprising herself with her vehemence. "We gather evidence. Take it to the territorial governor if necessary." Tahoe's expression softened slightly. We—" Before Sarah could answer, a sound echoed through the canyon, the distant report of a rifle followed by the clatter of falling stones. "Someone's coming," she said, already moving toward Willow. "How many entrances to this canyon?" "Two. The way you came, and a narrow path at the far end." Tahoe pointed to a nearly invisible crack in the canyon's eastern wall. Sarah made a quick decision. "Take my horse. Go through there. I'll delay them." Tahoe didn't move. "Why would you do that?" "Because I shot you by mistake. Because 43 people deserve justice." Sarah unhooked her rifle from Willow's saddle. "Because I'm tired of being afraid." Another shot sounded closer now. Voices carried on the cold air, men shouting to each other, coordinating their approach. Tahoe studied her for a heartbeat longer, then nodded once. He took Willow's reins, then paused. "The medallion. It belongs to a boy named Daniel. He lives in town. The blacksmith's apprentice." Sarah frowned. "Why would an Apache medicine charm be with him?" "Because his mother was Apache. Because I saved him once when he was very small." Tahoe's eyes held hers. "Find him. Tell him I am looking for him." With that, he swung onto Willow's back with a grace that belied his injury and urged the horse toward the hidden exit. Sarah positioned herself behind a large boulder that offered both cover and a clear view of the canyon's main entrance. She checked her rifle one last time, then settled in to wait. They came within minutes, 3 men on horseback moving cautiously into the clearing. Sarah recognized 2 of them, Jenkins, a mine guard known for his quick temper, and Reese, one of Sheriff Harlow's deputies. The third was a stranger better dressed than his companions, with the hard eyes of a man accustomed to violence. "Spread out," the stranger ordered. "The Apache can't have gone far." Sarah watched as the men dismounted, rifles at the ready. Jenkins noticed the cairns and spat on the ground. "Damn savages and their superstitions," he said. "Focus," the stranger snapped. "Find tracks. The boss wants him alive if possible." "And the woman?" Reese asked. "Blackwood's widow." The stranger's face hardened. "Same orders. Alive for questioning. Dead if she resists." Sarah's finger tightened on her trigger. 3 against 1, bad odds under any circumstances. Worse when they were looking specifically for her. She had 2 choices: reveal herself, bluff her way out of the situation, or fire first, use the element of surprise to even the odds. Neither option appealed to her. Then Reese's gaze fell on something near the largest cairn. He moved closer, bent down. "Blood," he called to the others. "Fresh." Tahoe's blood. He'd been kneeling there just minutes ago, his wound likely seeping through its crude bandage. The men converged on the spot, heads bent, following the trail with the focus of experienced hunters. Sarah saw the moment they noticed the direction toward the hidden exit, toward Tahoe's escape route. She made her decision. The rifle's report cracked across the canyon, echoing off the stone walls like thunder. Sarah's aim was true. The bullet struck the ground directly between the 3 men, sending them diving for cover. "Next one goes through someone's heart," she called, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Leave your weapons. Walk out the way you came in." A moment of stunned silence followed. Then the stranger's voice, cool and controlled. "Mrs. Blackwood, I presume. We're here on official business. Lower your weapon." "What official business brings armed men to a massacre site?" Sarah kept her rifle trained on the boulder behind which the stranger had taken cover. "Looking to finish what you started." "We're tracking a dangerous fugitive," the man replied. "An Apache renegade wanted for the murder of 3 settlers north of here." "Liar," Sarah said simply. A bullet whined off the rock beside her head, Jenkins trying to flank her from the left. Sarah swung her rifle and fired again, more carefully this time. A yell of pain told her she'd hit her mark, though likely not fatally. "You're outnumbered, Mrs. Blackwood," the stranger called. "Be reasonable." Sarah didn't bother responding. Instead, she fired again, forcing Reese to retreat from his attempt to circle behind her. 3 bullets spent, 2 remaining in the rifle plus the 6 in Matthew's revolver. Against 3 men who almost certainly had more ammunition than she did. The odds were worsening by the moment. A flicker of movement caught her eye, a shadow detaching itself from the canyon wall to her right. Tahoe moving silently behind the men's position. He hadn't escaped after all. Sarah felt a surge of both relief and frustration. She needed to create a distraction, give him time to get into position. "Nathan sent you, didn't he?" she called out, shifting slightly to keep all three men in her line of sight. "To clean up his mess." "Don't know what you're talking about, lady," Jenkins shouted back, his voice tight with pain. "The Apache you're hunting is Nathan Blackwood's son." Sarah continued loud enough for her voice to carry across the clearing. "His firstborn, his heir." That got a reaction. The stranger rose slightly from his cover, surprise evident on his face. "What did you say?" "You heard me." Sarah watched as Tahoe crept closer to Reese's position, a knife gleaming in his hand. "Ask Montgomery if you don't believe me. He delivered the baby 28 years ago, after Nathan got an Apache girl pregnant at Lake Tahoe." The stranger and Jenkins exchanged glances. This was clearly news to them. "You're lying," the stranger said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Am I? Then why did Nathan order the attack on this settlement? Why poison a well? Why disguise his men as Navajo?" Sarah was guessing now, piecing together fragments of Tahoe's fever talk with Montgomery's revelations. To hide the existence of his son. To eliminate anyone who might know the truth. The distraction worked. None of the men noticed as Tahoe slipped behind Reese, one hand clamping over the deputy's mouth, the other bringing the knife to his throat. "Drop your weapons," Tahoe called, his voice ringing with authority. "Or he dies first." The stranger cursed his rifle, still trained in Sarah's direction. "Kill him then. He's expendable." Cold calculation. The response of a professional, not a lawman. Reese's eyes widened in panic. He struggled against Tahoe's grip, managing to break free just enough to shout, "Ellis, for God's sake!" The name struck Sarah like a physical blow. Ellis Reed. Matthew had served with him during their brief stint in the territorial militia. Had mentioned him occasionally, a man with no moral center, Matthew had said. A man who enjoyed violence too much. Ellis Reed. Now working for Nathan Blackwood. Sarah fired again, forcing Ellis to duck behind his boulder. "It's over, Reed," she called. "Let's end this without more bloodshed." "You've killed us already, woman," Reed shouted back, rage breaking through his professional demeanor. "Harboring a murderer, shooting at lawmen. There's a rope waiting for you in Silver Creek." "I've done nothing wrong," Sarah responded. "And these men aren't lawmen. They're hired killers." As if to punctuate her words, a strangled cry echoed across the canyon. Sarah risked a glance toward Tahoe and saw Reese slump to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. Tahoe was already moving silent as a shadow toward Jenkins' position. One down, two to go. "Reed," Sarah called again, trying to keep his attention focused on her. "Walk away. Tell Nathan you couldn't find us. This doesn't have to be your fight." A harsh laugh answered her. "You think this is about loyalty? It's about money, Mrs. Blackwood. More money than you've ever seen. The copper strike. Smart woman. Yes, the copper. Worth millions to whoever controls it." Reed's voice had taken on a conversational tone, as if they were discussing the weather rather than murder. "And your property stands in the way, as does that Apache village. Or did I should say." Sarah's blood ran cold at the casual admission. "You were there, at the massacre." "I gave the orders. Nathan supplied the men and the poison, clean, efficient, or it would have been if your Apache friend hadn't survived." "He has a name," Sarah said, anger burning away her fear. "Tahoe, Nathan's son." "So you keep saying." Reed still sounded skeptical. "Convenient story." "True story," Sarah countered, "and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." Another cry cut off midway. Jenkins. Tahoe had reached him. Reed must have heard it too. "Jenkins," he called. When no answer came, his voice hardened. "Damn it all." Sarah saw him glance toward his horse, calculating his chances of reaching it before she could put a bullet in him. "Don't," she warned. Reed's eyes met hers across the distance, cold and reptilian. "You won't shoot an unarmed man in the back, Mrs. Blackwood, not with your moral outrage about massacres and justice." He was right. She wouldn't. But that didn't mean she would let him escape. "No," she agreed. "But he will." Reed spun just as Tahoe emerged from behind a nearby boulder, knife in hand. The mercenary was fast bringing up his rifle in one smooth motion, but Tahoe was faster. He lunged forward, the knife flashing in the weak sunlight. The blade caught Reed's forearm, opening a long gash that immediately began to pour blood. The rifle clattered to the ground as Reed staggered backward, drawing a revolver from his belt with his uninjured hand. "Stop!" Sarah shouted, stepping out from her cover rifle aimed at Reed's chest. "It's over, Ellis!" Reed's gaze darted between them, calculating. Then with surprising quickness he aimed at Tahoe and fired. Tahoe dropped to one knee, a new bloom of red spreading across his shirt. Not a killing shot, the bullet had caught him high in the shoulder, but enough to give Reed the opening he needed. He turned and ran for his horse, moving with the desperate speed of a man who knows death is at his heels. Sarah lined up her shot carefully. One bullet left in the rifle. It had to count. She squeezed the trigger. Reed stumbled, then fell clutching his leg where Sarah's bullet had shattered his knee. His scream echoed off the canyon walls, a sound of pure agony that made even Tahoe flinch. Sarah approached cautiously, rifle reloaded with her last 2 rounds. Reed lay writhing on the ground, face contorted with pain and hatred. "You should have killed me," he gasped. "Perhaps," Sarah agreed. "But then who would testify about Nathan's orders, about the massacre?" Understanding dawned in Reed's eyes, followed by a calculating gleam. "I could be persuaded to remember things differently, for the right price." Tahoe limped to Sarah's side, blood seeping through his fingers where he pressed them against his new wound. "He will lie. Men like him always lie." "Not if we have evidence to support his testimony," Sarah said, thinking rapidly. "The graves, Montgomery's examination, your existence." Reed laughed, a horrible sound through gritted teeth. "Against Nathan Blackwood's word, the most powerful man in the territory, your dreaming woman." Perhaps she was. But for the first time in years, Sarah felt fully awake, fully alive. The path ahead was dangerous, uncertain, but it was a path with purpose. "Bind his wounds," she told Tahoe. "We're taking him back to my place. He's our insurance now." Tahoe's expression darkened. "He deserves death for what he's done." "Yes," Sarah agreed simply. "But we need him alive, for now." As Tahoe reluctantly began tearing strips from Reed's shirt to bind the mercenary's shattered knee, Sarah surveyed the canyon clearing. 3 men down, 1 prisoner, and a truth too explosive to contain. The sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the graves of Tahoe's people. Sarah knew they couldn't remain here long. Soon someone would come looking for Reed and his men. "Can you ride?" she asked Tahoe. He nodded once, though the pallor of his face suggested otherwise. "I have endured worse." Sarah didn't argue. Instead, she helped him secure Reed across the back of one of the mercenaries' horses, then mount another. The 3rd horse they set free, slapping its rump to send it running back toward Silver Creek, a false trail for any pursuers. As they prepared to leave, Tahoe paused, looking back at the cairns. "I should say the prayers," he said quietly. "They deserve that much." Sarah nodded, understanding. "I'll watch the entrance." She moved away, giving him privacy for his ritual. The sun touched the rim of the canyon, sending a shaft of golden light across the burial ground. In that moment, despite the blood and violence of the day, a strange peace settled over Sarah. She had made her choice, stepped off the edge of her isolated existence into something larger, more dangerous, but infinitely more alive than the half-life she'd been living. When Tahoe rejoined her, his face was composed, the grief temporarily mastered. "Now we go," he said simply. Together they rode out of Dead Horse Canyon, leaving the graves behind, but carrying their silent testimony within them, a burden and a promise that would shape whatever lay ahead. The truth had been buried here once. Sarah was determined it would not be buried again. Night had nearly fallen by the time Sarah's homestead appeared on the horizon. The journey back had been slow and tense, with Reed's occasional groans punctuating the silence. Twice they had stopped to check Tahoe's wounds, both the original bullet hole in his side and the fresh injury to his shoulder. Both were seeping blood, but neither seemed immediately life-threatening. Still, Sarah knew they needed proper medical attention. The question was how to get it without bringing the full force of Silver Creek down upon them. "We can't stay here long," she said as they approached the barn. "They'll come looking for Reed soon enough." Tahoe nodded, his face gaunt in the deepening twilight. "Where?" It was a good question, one Sarah had been turning over in her mind throughout their journey. "Montgomery," she decided. "He's our only ally with the skills we need." Reed laughed weakly from his prone position across the saddle. "The old doctor? He'll hand you over the moment Harlow comes knocking." Sarah ignored him, dismounting stiffly. Her body ached from the tension of the day, from the unaccustomed violence. "Help me get him inside," she told Tahoe. "Then we'll decide our next move." Together they half-dragged, half-carried Reed into the barn, securing him to a support post with rope from Sarah's tack shed. The mercenary cursed steadily throughout the process, his face contorted with pain as they jostled his shattered knee. "You need a real doctor, not that butcher Montgomery," Reed spat when they'd finished. "This leg needs setting properly or I'll lose it." "You should have thought of that before you started hunting people," Sarah replied without sympathy. She turned to Tahoe, who had slumped against the barn wall, his breathing shallow. "Let me check your wounds." He waved her away. "Later. We need to move quickly." "Not if you bleed to death first." Sarah's tone brooked no argument. She gathered clean cloths and the bottle of whiskey she'd used earlier, then knelt beside him. "This will hurt." Tahoe didn't flinch as she peeled away the blood-soaked bandages. The original wound looked angry and inflamed, the stitches she'd placed straining against swollen flesh. The shoulder wound was cleaner, a through and through that had missed bone and major vessels. "You're lucky," she said, cleaning both injuries as best she could. "But you need antibiotics. Proper treatment." "Montgomery," Tahoe agreed, his eyes half-closed with exhaustion. Sarah rebandaged his wounds with the last of her clean cloths, then rose. "I'll saddle fresh horses. We leave within the hour." "For Silver Creek," Reed called after her, incredulous. "You're mad. They'll hang you both before sunrise." Sarah paused at the barn door. "Not Silver Creek. Montgomery's hunting cabin. It's in the foothills about 15 miles east. Nathan doesn't know about it, or if he does, he's forgotten. Matthew and I stayed there once years ago." Tahoe pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. "And Reed—" Sarah glanced at their prisoner, considering. "We can't take him. Can't leave him either." "I can solve that problem permanently," Tahoe said quietly, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. Reed's eyes widened. "Now wait a minute." "No." Sarah's voice was firm. "No more killing. We need him alive." "Then what?" Tahoe asked. Sarah thought for a moment. "We leave him here secure. I'll come back for him once you're safe with Montgomery." It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the best she could devise given their limited options. Tahoe clearly didn't like it, but he nodded in acceptance. They worked quickly after that, gathering supplies, saddling 2 of the mercenaries' horses fresher than Willow, who deserved rest after the day's exertions. Sarah packed food, ammunition, and her husband's old medical kit. She also retrieved something from the house that she'd never thought to use again. Matthew's journal containing detailed maps of the surrounding territory, including the location of Montgomery's cabin. Before leaving, she checked Reed's bindings one final time and left a canteen within reach of his good hand. "Don't get any ideas about escaping," she warned him. "Even if you could free yourself, that knee won't carry you far. You'd die of exposure before reaching help." Reed glared at her, hatred burning in his eyes. "When Nathan finds out what you've done, when Nathan finds out what I know," Sarah cut him off, "he'll have more to worry about than me." Outside, the night had fully claimed the desert. Stars glittered overhead, cold and distant, offering just enough light to navigate by. Sarah studied Matthew's journal by lantern light, tracing the route to Montgomery's cabin with her finger. "We'll follow the dry creek bed north for 5 miles, then cut east through Apache Pass," she told Tahoe. "If we push, we can reach the cabin by dawn." Tahoe, already mounted despite his injuries, nodded. Lead on." With a final glance at her homestead, possibly the last time she would ever see it, Sarah extinguished the lantern and swung into the saddle. They set off at a steady trot, two shadows moving through the vastness of the desert night, carrying a dangerous truth that could upend the foundations of Silver Creek forever. Behind them, Reed began working methodically at his bonds, pain forgotten in the single-minded pursuit of freedom. Dawn found them in the foothills, the landscape transformed from desert flatlands to rolling slopes covered in juniper and piñon pine. The air smelled different here, hints of resin and moisture replacing the dry dust of the plains. Sarah led the way, following a nearly invisible game trail that wound through increasingly dense vegetation. Tahoe rode silently behind her, his posture rigid with pain, but his eyes alert, scanning continuously for threats. "Not much farther," Sarah called over her shoulder. "Another mile or so." Tahoe nodded but didn't waste energy on a verbal response. The night's journey had taken its toll on him. Fresh blood stained his bandages, and fever had returned, evident in the unnatural brightness of his eyes. The trail narrowed, forcing them to ride single file between towering pines. Shafts of early sunlight pierced the canopy, dappling the forest floor with patches of gold. In another context it might have been beautiful. Now it merely offered welcome cover from potential pursuers. The cabin appeared suddenly a small, sturdy structure nestled against a granite outcropping that sheltered it from the prevailing winds. Built of local stone and timber, it blended so naturally with its surroundings that one could pass within 50 yards and never notice it. Sarah dismounted, approaching cautiously. The cabin had been abandoned for years, but someone might have discovered it in the interim. "Wait here," she told Tahoe, drawing her revolver. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a single room thick with dust and cobwebs. A stone fireplace dominated one wall opposite a narrow cot. A rough-hewn table and two chairs stood in the center of the space. Simple, functional, perfect for their needs. "It's clear," she called, holstering her weapon. Tahoe all but fell from his horse, catching himself against the cabin wall. Sarah was at his side, instantly supporting him as they made their way inside. "The cot," she directed, helping him to the narrow bed. "Rest. I'll secure the horses and get a fire started." He didn't argue, a testament to how badly the journey had depleted him. Sarah worked efficiently, unsaddling the horses and tethering them in a small clearing behind the cabin where they could graze. She collected firewood, started a fire in the long cold hearth, and melted snow for drinking water. Only when these essential tasks were complete did she allow herself to feel the crushing fatigue of the past 24 hours. She sank into one of the wooden chairs, hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline that had sustained her finally ebbed. "You should rest too," Tahoe said quietly from the cot. "I'll keep watch." Sarah glanced at him skeptically. "In your condition?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'm harder to kill than I look." "Evidently." Sarah rose reluctantly. "Wake me in 2 hours. Then we need to plan our next move." She settled on the floor near the fire, using her saddle as a pillow. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Images flashed behind her closed eyelids. Reed's face contorted with pain and hatred. The stone cairns in Dead Horse Canyon, Montgomery's troubled expression as he'd revealed Tahoe's parentage. And older memories, too. Matthew's body in the barn, the sound of Emily's labored breathing during the fever that took her, Nathan's cold assessment of her property after Matthew's death. Connections formed in her half-dreaming state. Patterns emerged. By the time Tahoe called her name, she had the beginnings of a plan. "We need Montgomery," she said, sitting up abruptly. "And we need to find the boy, Daniel." Tahoe, who had somehow managed to stand and take up position by the cabin's single window, turned to face her. "Daniel is in danger if Reed's men reach Silver Creek before we do." Sarah nodded, rising stiffly. Her muscles protested the movement, reminding her of yesterday's violence. "How's your shoulder?" "Still attached." Tahoe's attempt at humor fell flat, undermined by the pallor of his face and the fresh blood seeping through his bandage. "The fever is worse." Sarah crossed to him, pressing her palm to his forehead. His skin burned beneath her touch. "You need a doctor." "And Reed needs rescue before he talks," Tahoe countered. "Your plan?" Sarah hesitated, weighing priorities. Reed was secure for now, but if his men came looking and found him— Montgomery first, she decided. We need him to treat you properly. Then we retrieve Reed before anyone finds him. And Daniel— Sarah thought of the medallion Tahoe had found the Apache medicine charm on the child's grave. A half-blood boy like Tahoe himself. Another of Nathan's secrets, perhaps. One step at a time, she said. First, we need to get Montgomery here without raising alarms. How? Tahoe asked the practical question, cutting through her uncertainties. Sarah moved to the table, brushing away dust to create a clean surface. From her pocket she withdrew a pencil and a scrap of paper she'd torn from Matthew's journal. A message, she said, beginning to write. Delivered by someone Nathan's men won't suspect. Clara Wilson had owned Silver Creek's general store for 27 years. At 62, she'd outlasted 3 husbands, survived the silver bust that had nearly killed the town, and developed an uncanny instinct for trouble. That instinct was screaming now as she watched Sheriff Harlow and 4 armed men riding hard down the main street, dust billowing in their wake. She stepped back from her shop window, adjusting the spectacles perched on her nose. Something was happening. Something bad. Harlow only moved that fast when blood had been spilled or money was at stake. Often both. The bell above her door jingled, announcing a customer. Clara turned, customer smile already in place. It faltered when she saw who had entered, a young Apache boy, perhaps 12 years old, dressed in the rough clothes of a blacksmith's apprentice. "Daniel," she said, her voice automatically dropping to a whisper. "You shouldn't be here. Not today." The boy glanced nervously over his shoulder. "Miss Clara, I need supplies. Master Jenkins said—" "Never mind what Jenkins said," Clara interrupted, moving quickly from behind her counter. "There's trouble brewing. You need to make yourself scarce." Daniel's dark eyes widened. "What kind of trouble?" Clara hesitated. The boy had enough burdens without adding to them. Half Apache in a town that barely tolerated his presence. Orphaned at 6. Apprenticed to a blacksmith who worked him like a mule and fed him like a stray dog. "The kind that has Sheriff Harlow riding in like the devil himself is on his tail," she said finally. "The kind that makes me think you should stay out of sight for a while." Understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes, understanding no child should possess. "Because I'm Apache." "Because you're smart," Clara corrected, patting his shoulder awkwardly. She'd never had children of her own and wasn't entirely comfortable with them. But Daniel had always seemed like an old soul to her, someone who saw too much, felt too deeply. "Now what supplies did Jenkins send you for?" "Tobacco, coffee, sugar if you have it." Clara gathered the items quickly, wrapping them in brown paper. As she worked, the sound of raised voices filtered through her front window, Harlow shouting orders to his men outside the sheriff's office across the street. "Take the back door," she told Daniel, handing him the package. "And Daniel, if anyone asks, you haven't been to town today. You've been at the forge all morning." The boy nodded solemnly, clutching the package to his chest. "Yes, ma'am." Clara watched him slip out the rear entrance, a strange unease settling in her bones. Something was very wrong in Silver Creek today. She could feel it in the air, thick as the dust that never quite settled in this harsh landscape. The bell jingled again. This time it was Dr. Montgomery who entered, his medical bag clutched tightly in one hand. "Clara." He nodded, his usual courtly manner subdued. "Have you heard what's happened?" "Not yet, but judging by Harlow's excitement, it must be significant." Montgomery glanced around the empty shop, then moved closer to the counter. "Ellis Reed and 2 of Harlow's deputies have gone missing. They rode out yesterday to investigate reports of an Apache near the Blackwood homestead. Never returned." Clara absorbed this, the pieces falling into place. Sarah Blackwood. That poor woman hasn't bothered anyone in years. Perhaps, but Nathan Blackwood has been very interested in her property lately. Montgomery's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "There are rumors of copper in the eastern hills. Valuable deposits." "Copper." Clara's eyebrows rose. "So that's what this is about. Money as usual. Isn't it always?" Montgomery's expression was grim. "Harlow's organizing a search party. They're calling it a rescue mission, but they're carrying enough firepower to start a war," Clara finished, having observed the men gathering outside. "Albert, what's really going on here?" Montgomery hesitated, conflict evident in his aged features. He and Clara had known each other for decades, had even courted briefly before her second marriage. If there was anyone in Silver Creek he might trust with the truth, it was her. Before he could decide, the shop door opened again. Daniel stood there breathless, as if he'd run around the building rather than taking the time to walk. "Dr. Montgomery," he gasped, "I was sent to give you this." He thrust forward a folded piece of paper, then darted a nervous glance at Clara. "In private, they said." Montgomery took the paper with a frown. "Who sent you, boy?" Daniel shook his head. "Can't say. They paid me a silver dollar." He opened his palm to reveal the coin, a fortune for a blacksmith's apprentice. Clara and Montgomery exchanged glances. The doctor carefully unfolded the note, angling it so Clara could read it as well. The message was brief, written in a firm hand. "Montgomery T. needs medical attention urgently. Infection fever. Read secure but knowledge dangerous. Come alone to your cabin. Bring supplies. Trust no one in Silver Creek." S.B. Montgomery folded the paper quickly and slipped it into his pocket. "Thank you, Daniel. You've done well." The boy nodded, clutching his silver dollar. "There's something else," he said hesitantly. "The person who gave me the note, they said to tell you that they found something that belongs to me. A medallion." Clara watched as Montgomery's face paled visibly. "Did they describe this medallion silver, with markings?" Daniel's hand moved unconsciously to his chest, as if reaching for something that wasn't there. "Apache medicine. My mother's." Montgomery's eyes closed briefly. "I see. Thank you, Daniel. You should go now. Return to the forge." The boy lingered, clearly sensing the adult's tension. "Is something wrong, sir? Should I be afraid?" It was Clara who answered, her voice gentle but firm. "You should be careful, child, as always. Now go before Jenkins comes looking for you." When Daniel had gone, Montgomery turned to Clara, decision made. "I need your help." "Clearly," she replied dryly. "Sarah Blackwood has somehow gotten herself mixed up with an Apache and Ellis Reed, and now requires your clandestine medical services at your hunting cabin." Montgomery's lips twitched despite the gravity of the situation. "Your powers of deduction remain undiminished, Clara, as does your talent for understatement, Albert." She moved to lock the shop door and flipped the sign to "Closed." "What do you need?" "Medical supplies, food, ammunition if you have it." Montgomery set his bag on the counter and began emptying it of unnecessary items. "And your word that you'll tell no one where I've gone." Clara studied him, this man she had known for most of her adult life, always proper, always cautious, now preparing to ride into what could only be described as a dangerous conspiracy. "What's happening, Albert, really?" Montgomery straightened, meeting her gaze directly. "Something terrible was done in the name of progress. Something Nathan Blackwood ordered and Ellis Reed executed. And now Sarah Blackwood and an Apache warrior named Tahoe are the only ones with proof." "Proof of what?" "A massacre. 43 Apache, including women and children, murdered for the copper beneath their land." Montgomery's voice was steady, but Clara could see the controlled fury in his eyes. "And there's more. The Apache with Sarah, I believe he's Nathan's illegitimate son." Clara felt as if the floor had shifted beneath her feet. "Nathan Blackwood has an Apache son. Conceived at Lake Tahoe 28 years ago. I delivered the child myself." Montgomery began repacking his bag with supplies from Clara's shelves. "If this becomes known, Nathan loses everything: his company, his standing, possibly his freedom. And Silver Creek loses its primary employer," Clara added, thinking of the practical implications. The town had nearly died when the silver played out. The promise of copper was the only thing keeping many families from moving on. "Yes." Montgomery closed his bag with a decisive snap. "That's the calculation Nathan is making, the lives of 43 Apache against the future of Silver Creek." Clara moved to her storeroom, returning with a box of ammunition and a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "My late husband's revolver," she explained, seeing Montgomery's surprised expression. "I've kept it loaded since the last time the Apache raided." "That was 15 years ago, Clara. And yet here we are talking about massacres and illegitimate sons." She handed him the weapon. "Take it. Sarah might need it more than I do." Montgomery accepted the gun with a nod of thanks. "I should go. The longer I delay, the more danger they're in." "Wait." Clara moved behind her counter again, retrieving a leather-bound book from a drawer. "My ledger. It records every purchase Nathan Blackwood and Silver Creek Mining have made for the past year." She opened it to a marked page. "Including large quantities of strychnine 3 months ago, listed as pest control." Montgomery's eyes widened. "Clara, if Nathan discovers you've shared this, then I'll have more to worry about than unpaid debts." She pressed the ledger into his hands. "Take it. Use it. Make sure those 43 deaths weren't for nothing." Montgomery tucked the ledger into his bag, then surprised her by taking her hand and pressing it briefly to his lips. "You always were the bravest person in this town." Clara felt a flush rise to her cheeks, ridiculous at her age. "Just the most practical. Now go before Harlow decides to search every building in town." As Montgomery slipped out the back door of her shop, Clara returned to her window, watching as more men gathered in front of the sheriff's office. Nathan Blackwood had arrived, sitting tall on his black stallion, giving orders with the confidence of a man unaccustomed to being questioned. Power, money, progress. The unholy trinity that had built Silver Creek and would destroy it just as surely. Clara turned away from the window, a decision crystallizing in her mind. If Montgomery and Sarah Blackwood were going to challenge Nathan's empire, they would need more than medical supplies and a single ledger. They would need allies. And Clara Wilson knew everyone in Silver Creek, including those who had reason to hate Nathan Blackwood almost as much as she did. Montgomery reached his cabin as the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the pines. He approached cautiously, medical bag in one hand, Clara's revolver in the other. Though he'd sent the note himself, there was no guarantee Sarah and her Apache companion would be the only ones waiting. "Sarah," he called softly as he neared the structure. "It's Montgomery." The cabin door opened a crack, revealing Sarah's face, haggard with exhaustion, but alert. "Alone?" "Yes." She opened the door wider, relief evident in her posture. "Thank God. Tahoe's fever has worsened. I've done what I could, but let me see him." Montgomery entered quickly, setting down his bag and surveying the cabin's interior. Tahoe lay on the cot, his skin sheened with sweat, breathing shallow and rapid. A fire burned in the hearth, heating water in an old iron pot. Montgomery moved to the wounded man's side, professional demeanor taking over. "How long has he been like this?" "Since midday," Sarah replied, hovering nearby. "He was lucid this morning, delirious by noon." The doctor nodded, already unpacking his supplies. "The wound, 2, actually. One in his side, my bullet. That's the infected one, and a fresh wound to his shoulder from yesterday's confrontation." Montgomery raised an eyebrow at this, but didn't press for details. Instead, he focused on examining Tahoe, gently removing the blood-soaked bandages to reveal the angry, inflamed flesh beneath. "The infection is deep," he said grimly. "He needs penicillin." From his bag he produced a small vial and syringe. "I brought what I had, but it may not be enough." Sarah watched anxiously as Montgomery administered the injection, then began cleaning the wounds with a thoroughness her makeshift efforts had lacked. "Will he recover?" "If the antibiotics work quickly, yes." Montgomery glanced up at her. "You've had quite an adventure since I saw you last, Sarah." "That's one word for it." "Your note mentioned Reed, Ellis Reed." Sarah nodded, sinking into one of the wooden chairs. Now that help had arrived. The adrenaline that had sustained her was fading rapidly. "We took him prisoner after he admitted to ordering the massacre. He's secured at my homestead." Montgomery's hands stilled. "You left him alone." "I had no choice. Tahoe needed immediate care, and Reed has a shattered knee. He won't be going anywhere." "Unless someone finds him." Montgomery resumed his work stitching Tahoe's shoulder wound with neat, precise sutures. "Harlow has organized search parties. They're combing the area around your property as we speak." Sarah straightened, fatigue forgotten. "How many men?" "At least 20 when I left town. More by now, I'd imagine. Nathan is personally leading the effort." "Damn it." Sarah rose, pacing the small confines of the cabin. "If they find Reed—" "They'll know everything," Montgomery finished. "About Tahoe, about what you've discovered. We need to go back, now." Montgomery shook his head, tying off the final stitch. "You can't move Tahoe again so soon, and you're in no condition to face Nathan and his men alone." "Then what do you suggest, that we sit here and wait for them to find us?" "No." Montgomery reached into his bag and withdrew Clara's ledger. "We build our case, gather evidence that even Nathan can't dismiss or bury." Sarah took the ledger, frowning as she leafed through its pages. "What is this?" "Clara Wilson's record of every purchase made by Silver Creek Mining for the past year, including—" he pointed to a specific entry, "enough strychnine to poison an entire Apache village 3 months ago." Sarah's eyes widened as the implications sank in. "Clara gave you this voluntarily. It seems you may have allies in Silver Creek after all." Hope, a sensation so unfamiliar that Sarah almost didn't recognize it, flickered briefly. "Not enough to stand against Nathan and his hired guns." "Perhaps more than you think." Montgomery finished bandaging Tahoe's wounds and moved to wash his hands in the pot of heated water. "Clara mentioned others who have reason to resent Nathan's influence. Former miners who lost claims when Silver Creek Consolidated expanded. Shopkeepers forced to extend credit or lose business." "Resentment isn't the same as willingness to risk one's life," Sarah pointed out. "True, but it's a starting point." Montgomery dried his hands on a relatively clean cloth. "We need to think strategically. Nathan's power lies in his money and his connections to territorial officials. To challenge him effectively, we need evidence of criminal activity that can't be ignored or explained away." Sarah held up the ledger. "Like this? It's a start, but we need more. Reed's testimony if we can secure it. Documentation of the massacre, perhaps photographs of the graves. And most importantly—" Montgomery's gaze shifted to Tahoe's unconscious form, proof of his parentage. "How do we prove that it was 28 years ago? The mother is dead." Montgomery's expression turned contemplative. "There were records. A birth certificate I filed with the territorial office in Phoenix, and letters Nathan wrote to the Apache woman while she was pregnant. Catherine found one once, which is how I learned of the affair. Nathan would have destroyed anything that could link him to an Apache woman. Perhaps. But Nathan isn't the only Blackwood who might have preserved such evidence." Montgomery met Sarah's gaze. "Matthew knew about his brother's indiscretion. He mentioned it once years ago after too much whiskey. Said his father had kept a file of Nathan's mistakes as insurance." Sarah's breath caught. "Matthew never told me about any file. Would he have, given your complicated relationship with Nathan after your marriage?" She had to concede the point. Matthew had always tried to shield her from the uglier aspects of his family dynamics. Even if such a file existed, it would be at the Blackwood estate. We can hardly walk in and ask to search the study." "No," Montgomery agreed. "But there may be another way to access it." He hesitated, clearly weighing his next words carefully. "Nathan has a housekeeper, Esther Redmond. She was nursemaid to both Nathan and Matthew as boys, fiercely loyal to the family, but, Sarah prompted. "But she was especially fond of Matthew, and she never approved of how Nathan treated you after his death." Sarah considered this. Esther had always been kind to her in the reserved way of longtime servants, had even slipped her extra food during the grim meals following Matthew's funeral when Sarah had been too numb with grief to eat. "You think she might help us?" "I think it's worth asking," Montgomery replied. "She's one of the few people who can move freely within the Blackwood house without arousing suspicion." Before Sarah could respond, a low groan from the cot drew their attention. Tahoe was stirring, his eyes opening to thin slits. "Water," he rasped. Montgomery quickly poured a cup from the canteen and helped him drink. "Easy now, small sips." Tahoe drank obediently, then fixed his gaze on Sarah. "Reed." "Still at the homestead," she answered. "But there's a problem. Search parties are looking for us. They may find him." Tahoe struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. Montgomery placed a restraining hand on his shoulder. "You're not going anywhere for at least 24 hours, the doctor said firmly. "The infection nearly killed you. If they find Reed, we're all dead anyway," Tahoe countered, though he stopped fighting against Montgomery's hold. "We need a plan," Sarah said, resuming her pacing. "A way to retrieve Reed without running into Nathan's men." Montgomery considered this. "Clara could help. She knows everyone's movements in town. If she could get word to us about the search patterns—" "Too risky." Sarah shook her head. "She's already in danger for giving you that ledger." "What about the boy?" Tahoe asked suddenly. "Daniel, did you find him?" Montgomery and Sarah exchanged glances. "He delivered your message," Montgomery confirmed. "He mentioned a medallion." Tahoe's hand moved to his chest where the silver disc hung from its leather cord. "His mother's. I found it at the massacre site." "His mother was Apache?" Sarah asked, though she'd already guessed as much from their earlier conversation. "Yes. Rebecca. She worked at the Silver Creek brothel until she died 5 years ago. Consumption." Tahoe's voice held no judgment, just a matter-of-fact acceptance of the harsh realities facing his mother's people. "I helped her escape from an abusive client once. She gave me the medallion as thanks." "And Daniel," Montgomery prompted. "Her son, 7 years old when she died. The blacksmith took him as an apprentice, cheap labor." Sarah caught the implication in his tone. "You think Daniel is also Nathan's child?" Tahoe's expression hardened. "I know he is. Rebecca told me. Nathan was a regular client before she got pregnant. After he never visited her again but sent money through an intermediary for 3 years. "Just as he did with your mother," Montgomery murmured. "A pattern," Sarah said, the pieces falling into place. "Nathan has a weakness for Apache women and a habit of abandoning the children he fathers with them." "Not just abandoning," Tahoe corrected his voice, taking on an edge. "Erasing. Removing any evidence they ever existed, including, when necessary, their mother's entire communities." The implications hung heavy in the cabin's close air. Nathan Blackwood, respected businessman and pillar of Silver Creek society, had not only fathered and abandoned half-Apache children, but had orchestrated a massacre to eliminate any connection to them when it threatened his plans for the copper deposits. "Daniel is in danger," Sarah realized. If Nathan believes the boy knows anything about his parentage, Nathan has tolerated Daniel's presence in Silver Creek because no one suspects the connection, Montgomery said. "But now, with what's happened—" "We need to get the boy out," Tahoe stated flatly. "Tonight." Sarah looked at him incredulously. "You can barely stand." "I don't need to stand to create a distraction," Tahoe replied. "And we need Daniel. He's living proof of Nathan's hypocrisy, a second-half Apache son working as virtual slave labor in Nathan's own town." Montgomery appeared troubled. "Involving a child in this? He's already involved." Tahoe cut him off. "The moment I found his mother's medallion on that grave, he became part of this. Nathan will realize that soon enough, if he hasn't already." Sarah had to admit the logic, unwelcome as it was. "Even if we agree Daniel needs protection, how do we get him out of Silver Creek without being seen, and where would we take him?" "I know places in these hills where no white man has ever set foot," Tahoe said. "Apache hiding places. The boy would be safe there until this is resolved." "And Reed," Sarah pressed. "We still need his testimony." "One problem at a time." Montgomery intervened, his practical nature asserting itself. "Tahoe is right about Daniel being in danger, but he's wrong about moving tonight. None of us is in any condition for another rescue mission so soon." "Then what do you suggest?" Tahoe demanded. "Rest, recovery, planning." Montgomery checked Tahoe's forehead for fever. "The penicillin seems to be working. Your temperature is down. By morning you might be strong enough to travel short distances. In the meantime, I'll return to Silver Creek and assess the situation. Find out where the search parties are focused, whether Reed has been discovered, and most importantly, ensure Daniel remains safe for now." Sarah frowned. "You can't go back. If Nathan suspects you're helping us—" "Nathan has no reason to suspect me," Montgomery countered. "I'm an old man who's served as Silver Creek's doctor for 30 years. My disappearance would raise more questions than my presence." "It's too dangerous," Sarah insisted, "which is precisely why it must be me." Montgomery's tone was gentle but firm. "You're both fugitives now. I'm still a respected member of the community." Tahoe had been watching this exchange with a calculating expression. "The doctor is right. He can move freely where we cannot. But," he fixed Montgomery with an intense stare, "if you betray us—" "I won't," Montgomery said simply. "I've been complicit in Nathan's sins through my silence for too long. It's time I atoned for that." The conviction in his voice seemed to satisfy Tahoe, who nodded once and settled back against the thin pillow. Sarah remained unconvinced. "At least wait until morning. You can't navigate these trails safely in the dark." "Dawn, then," Montgomery conceded. "And Sarah, try to get some rest yourself. You'll need your strength in the days ahead." She knew he was right, but the thought of sleep while danger circled ever closer seemed impossible. Still she nodded, settling herself on the floor near the fire, her back against the wall revolver within easy reach. Montgomery busied himself preparing more bandages and organizing his medical supplies. Tahoe's breathing gradually deepened as exhaustion and medication pulled him toward sleep. Outside, night had fully claimed the forest. Through the cabin's single window, Sarah could see stars piercing the darkness between pine branches, cold, distant points of light in a vast emptiness. Like truth in a world built on lies. Her eyelids grew heavy, despite her determination to remain vigilant. The events of the past 2 days caught up with her all at once, dragging her toward unconsciousness. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of the graves in Dead Horse Canyon, silent witnesses to a crime that would not remain buried, no matter how much blood and money Nathan Blackwood was willing to spend to keep it so. The blacksmith's forge was already blazing when Daniel arrived for work before dawn. Jenkins, red-faced and sweating despite the early hour, barely acknowledged the boy's presence with a grunt. Daniel moved silently to his usual position, gathering tools and preparing for the day's work. He had learned early that Jenkins preferred him invisible, unless needed a ghost that somehow managed to keep the coal hot, the tools organized, and the finished products stacked neatly for delivery. But today something was different. Jenkins was working with unusual intensity, hammering a piece of metal with vicious force, cursing under his breath between blows. "Damn Apache lovers," he muttered, plunging the glowing metal into water. Steam hissed upward, momentarily obscuring his florid face. "Thinks she can hide a savage in her barn and get away with it." Daniel kept his head down, pretending not to hear, but his ears strained for every word, especially after the strange encounter with the silver dollar and the message about his mother's medallion. "Boy," Jenkins barked suddenly, "fetch more coal and be quick about it." Daniel hurried to obey, hauling a heavy bucket from the storage shed behind the forge. As he returned, he nearly collided with a man entering the smithy, tall, well-dressed, with a silver watch chain glinting across his vest. Nathan Blackwood. Daniel shrank back, trying to make himself invisible as usual, but Blackwood's cold gaze fell on him, lingering in a way that sent prickles of unease down the boy's spine. "Jenkins?" Blackwood nodded to the blacksmith. "I need 20 more horseshoes by noon. We're expanding the search area." 20. Jenkins wiped sweat from his brow with a grimy forearm. "That's a tall order, sir. Even with the boy helping, I'll pay double your usual rate." Blackwood's tone made it clear the matter wasn't open for discussion. His eyes drifted to Daniel again, narrowing slightly. "The boy, he's Apache, isn't he?" Jenkins shrugged. "Half-breed. His mother worked at Kate's place before the consumption took her. Obedient enough if you keep a firm hand." Blackwood approached Daniel, who fought the urge to retreat. "What's your name, boy?" "Daniel, sir." He kept his eyes downcast as Jenkins had taught him. "Daniel," Blackwood repeated as if testing the sound of it. How old are you? 12, sir, I think. You think? A note of amusement entered Blackwood's voice. Don't you know your own age? Daniel risked a glance upward. My mother died when I was 7. She knew the exact day, but something flickered across Blackwood's face too quickly for Daniel to identify. Your mother. What was her name? Rebecca, Daniel answered, wondering why this rich white man cared about a dead Apache prostitute. Rebecca. Blackwood echoed, his expression unreadable. After a moment he seemed to recollect himself, turning back to Jenkins. I need those horseshoes by noon. No excuses. With that he departed, leaving behind a lingering tension that even Jenkins seemed to feel. The blacksmith stared at the doorway, then at Daniel, an unusual speculation in his gaze. Get to work, he growled finally. We've got horseshoes to make. Daniel returned to his tasks, but his mind raced. First, the strange message about his mother's medallion, the one she'd always told him was special, a protection against evil spirits. Then Nathan Blackwood himself asking questions about his mother, his age. Something was happening, something that involved him, though he couldn't imagine how or why. As morning progressed, more men arrived at the forge collecting weapons, having horses shod. Daniel caught fragments of conversation, a search for an Apache warrior, a missing lawman, Sarah Blackwood's involvement. Blackwood. The name echoed in his mind, connecting to the man who had questioned him. Was Sarah a relative? Why would she help an Apache? By midday, Daniel had pieced together enough to understand that something serious had occurred, serious enough to mobilize half the men in Silver Creek, and somehow his mother's medallion was connected to it all. When Jenkins finally barked at him to deliver a package to the general store, Daniel felt a surge of relief. Perhaps Miss Clara would know more. She always seemed to know everything that happened in Silver Creek. The streets were unusually busy for a weekday, men hurrying back and forth between the sheriff's office and the saloon, where a makeshift command center had been established. Daniel kept his head down, clutching the package of nails Jenkins had ordered him to deliver. He entered the general store through the back door, as he always did. Clara Wilson stood behind her counter glasses, perched on her nose, watching the activity outside her window with a troubled expression. Miss Clara, Daniel called softly, setting the package on the counter. Jenkins sent these. Clara turned, her face softening at the sight of him. Daniel, I was hoping you'd come by. She glanced toward the front of the store, ensuring they were alone, then leaned closer. Has anyone spoken to you today? Anyone unusual? Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Mr. Blackwood came to the forge this morning, asked about my mother. Clara's eyes widened slightly. What did you tell him? Just her name, that she died when I was 7. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Miss Clara, what's happening? Why did someone send me with that message yesterday about my mother's medallion? Clara appeared to be weighing her words carefully. Daniel, do you remember your mother ever speaking about your father? The question caught him off guard. She said he was an important man, that he couldn't acknowledge me, but that he made sure we had enough to eat. Did she ever mention his name? Daniel shook his head. She said it was safer if I didn't know. Clara nodded, as if this confirmed something. I need you to listen very carefully, Daniel. I believe you may be in danger. Fear, a familiar companion throughout his young life, coiled in Daniel's stomach. Because I'm Apache. Because of who your father might be, Clara corrected gently. And because of what happened to some of your mother's people recently. The medallion, Daniel whispered, understanding dawning. The person who sent the message found it among dead Apache. Clara looked impressed by his quick grasp of the situation. Yes, and if certain people believe you know more than you should about that incident. She didn't need to finish. Daniel had seen what happened to those who crossed the powerful men of Silver Creek. What should I do? He asked, voice steady despite his fear. Clara reached beneath her counter and withdrew a small package wrapped in oilcloth. Take this. Hide it somewhere on your person where Jenkins won't find it. Inside is food, a knife, and this. She pressed a folded paper into his hand. Directions to a cabin in the eastern foothills. Memorize them, then destroy the paper. You want me to run away? Daniel couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. Miss Clara had always emphasized the importance of honoring commitments, of seeing things through. "I want you to survive," she replied bluntly. "Tonight, after Jenkins is asleep, leave town. Follow these directions. You'll find people there who can explain everything and keep you safe." "Dr. Montgomery," Daniel guessed, remembering the message he'd delivered. Clara's eyebrows rose. "Clever boy, yes, and others. People who knew your mother." Daniel's heart quickened. "The Apache who sent the message about the medallion." "Yes, his name is Tahoe." Clara glanced nervously toward the window again. "You should go now before Jenkins comes looking for you. Remember, tonight after dark. Take only what you need to survive." Daniel tucked the package inside his shirt, where it lay flat enough against his thin frame to be invisible. "Thank you, Miss Clara." She surprised him by placing a gentle hand on his cheek, the first time she'd ever touched him with such affection. "You're a good boy, Daniel. Braver than you know. Your mother would be proud." The words warmed something inside him that had been cold for a very long time. He nodded once, unable to speak past the sudden lump in his throat, then slipped out the back door and into the alley. As he made his way back to the forge, Daniel felt a strange calmness descend. For 5 years he had existed in a kind of limbo, not fully Apache, not accepted as white, belonging nowhere and to no one. Tonight, that would change. Tonight, he would take the first step toward discovering who he truly was, and perhaps who his father might be. The thought sustained him through the remainder of the day's labor, through Jenkins's curses and the occasional cuff to the ear for imagined infractions. None of it mattered anymore. By dawn, he would be gone. As twilight settled over Silver Creek, Daniel watched Jenkins drain the last of a whiskey bottle and settle into his cot in the small room adjoining the forge. The blacksmith's snores soon filled the space, deep rattling exhalations that testified to the depth of his drunken slumber. Daniel waited another hour to be certain, then gathered his few possessions: a spare shirt, a small carving his mother had made him, the package Clara had given him. He hesitated over Jenkins' coin pouch visible on the workbench where the blacksmith had tossed it earlier. Taking it would be stealing, but leaving it would mean starting his journey with nothing. His mother's voice seemed to whisper in his ear, "Survival isn't a sin, Daniel. Take what you need to live another day." He slipped 3 coins from the pouch, enough for emergencies, not enough that Jenkins would immediately notice their absence. The night air felt clean and crisp after the smoky confines of the forge. Daniel moved through shadows, avoiding the main street where lanterns still burned in the saloon windows. The search parties had returned at sunset but would resume at first light. His window of escape was narrow. As he reached the eastern edge of town, a figure stepped out from behind a boulder blocking his path. Daniel froze, heart hammering against his ribs. "Going somewhere, boy?" The voice belonged to Ellis Reed, Nathan Blackwood's enforcer. But that was impossible. Reed was missing part of the reason for the search parties crisscrossing the territory. Daniel squinted into the darkness. The man before him was indeed Reed, but a Reed transformed by pain and rage. He leaned heavily on a crude crutch, one leg bound in a blood-soaked bandage. His usually immaculate clothing was torn and filthy. "Mr. Reed," Daniel managed, fighting to keep his voice steady, "everyone's looking for you." "I'm aware." Reed's voice was a rasp, barely recognizable. "And now I've found what I'm looking for. Nathan Blackwood's second bastard." Daniel took an involuntary step backward. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" Reed limped forward, his face contorted with pain and malice. "Apache mother, unknown father, but not unknown to me, not anymore. You're coming with me, boy. Insurance." "No." The word escaped before Daniel could consider its wisdom. Reed's laugh was a terrible sound, part pain, part genuine amusement. "Brave, like your half-brother, but ultimately futile." He lunged forward with surprising speed, grabbing Daniel's arm in a grip like iron. "Nathan will pay handsomely to keep his secrets buried. And you, boy, are the biggest secret of all." Daniel reacted instinctively, driving his knee upward into Reed's injured leg. The man howled, releasing Daniel's arm as he staggered backward. "You little savage!" Reed gasped, fumbling at his belt for a weapon. Daniel didn't wait to see if he found one. He turned and ran sprinting toward the eastern hills with a speed born of terror and desperate determination. Behind him, Reed's curses faded, replaced by the sound of his own labored breathing and the pounding of his heart. He didn't slow, didn't look back, didn't stop until the lights of Silver Creek had vanished behind him and the forest had swallowed him completely. Only then, sheltered by darkness and distance, did Daniel pause to consider what had just happened. Reed's words echoed in his mind, "Nathan Blackwood's second bastard. Like your half-brother." The implications were staggering. If Reed spoke the truth, then Nathan Blackwood, the richest, most powerful man in Silver Creek, was his father. And somewhere there was another son, a half-brother. The Apache called Tahoe. Perhaps Daniel withdrew Clara's directions from his pocket, straining to read them in the faint starlight. The cabin lay 5 miles east, following a stream that would lead to a clearing marked by a lightning-struck pine. Taking a deep breath, he tucked the paper away and set off once more, moving more cautiously now through the unfamiliar terrain. If what Reed said was true, if Nathan Blackwood truly was his father, then everything in Daniel's life was about to change. For better or worse, remained to be seen. Behind him, on the outskirts of Silver Creek, Ellis Reed dragged himself painfully toward the sheriff's office, a newfound purpose driving him forward despite his agony. Nathan Blackwood would pay for his secrets one way or another. Dawn broke over the eastern hills, pale light filtering through pine branches to dapple the forest floor. Sarah stood at the cabin's single window, watching as the shadows retreated. She hadn't slept much, brief snatches of rest interrupted by the constant vigilance of the hunted. Behind her, Tahoe sat at the rough wooden table, methodically cleaning the revolver Montgomery had left before departing for Silver Creek the previous morning. The doctor had not returned. "He should have been back by now," Sarah said, voicing the concern that had grown with each passing hour. Tahoe didn't look up from his task. "Either he's been delayed or he's been caught. Either way, we can't wait much longer." Sarah knew he was right. They had given Montgomery until nightfall, then another sleepless night of waiting. Now, with the new day breaking, decisions could no longer be postponed. "Reed is our priority," she said, turning from the window. "If Nathan's men have found him, then we're already exposed," Tahoe finished. He set the cleaned revolver on the table with a decisive click. "But we go to the boy first." Sarah frowned. "Daniel, why?" "Because Reed knows about him now." Tahoe rose, testing his injured shoulder with a cautious rotation. The fever had broken overnight, and though he remained pale, his eyes were clear and focused. "Montgomery would have checked on him. If the doctor hasn't returned, it means something's wrong." The logic was sound, if troubling. "You think Reed escaped?" "I think we underestimated him." Tahoe moved to the fireplace where a small pot of coffee simmered. He poured 2 cups, handing one to Sarah. "A man like that doesn't give up easily. If he got free, he'd head for Silver Creek and leverage. Daniel would be an obvious target." Sarah accepted the coffee, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm tin cup. "So we ride for Silver Creek, not my homestead." "Yes, but not directly into town." Tahoe's expression hardened. "We circle around, approach from the north. The blacksmith's forge is on the outskirts. We can reach it without being seen if we're careful. And if Daniel isn't there, then we find Montgomery, or Clara Wilson." Tahoe drained his cup and set it aside. "Someone in that town knows what's happened." Sarah nodded, decision made. They gathered their meager supplies quickly, weapons, ammunition, the last of the food Montgomery had brought. Sarah carefully folded Clara's ledger and tucked it inside her coat. Evidence. Proof of Nathan's crimes should they need it. Outside, the horses nickered softly in greeting as they approached. The animals were rested, fed on the rich grass that grew in the small clearing behind the cabin. Sarah checked the saddle cinches while Tahoe loaded their supplies into the saddlebags. "We should reach Silver Creek by midday if we push," she said, mounting with a fluid motion that belied her exhaustion. Tahoe swung into his saddle more carefully, mindful of his healing wounds. "Stay alert. Nathan will have men watching all approaches to town." They set off at a steady trot, following game trails that wound through increasingly dense forest. Neither spoke much as they rode, each lost in their own thoughts and vigilant for any sign of pursuit. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist that had clung to the lower branches. Birds called to one another in the canopy overhead, ordinary sounds that seemed incongruous against the tension of their mission. By mid-morning they had reached the ridge overlooking the eastern approach to Silver Creek. Sarah reined in her horse, surveying the town spread below them. From this distance it appeared peaceful smoke rising from chimneys, horses, and wagons moving along the main street, the silver spire of the small church catching the sunlight. "Looks quiet," she murmured. Tahoe pointed to the north end of town. "Too quiet. Where are the search parties? Where are all the men Harlow gathered?" Sarah scanned the area, realizing he was right. The frantic activity Montgomery had described was noticeably absent. "Something's happened." "Yes." Tahoe's expression was grim. "Let's find out what." They descended the ridge cautiously, using stands of juniper and scrub oak as cover. As they drew closer to town, Sarah noticed something else: a cluster of horses outside the Silver Creek mining office, including Nathan's distinctive black stallion. "Meeting," she whispered to Tahoe, nodding toward the building. "Important one, judging by the turnout." Tahoe's eyes narrowed as he studied the scene. "Change of plans. We split up. I'll circle around to the forge, look for Daniel. You find Montgomery or Clara." Sarah hesitated. "Separating is dangerous." "So is riding together into a town that wants us dead," Tahoe countered. "We'll meet at Bitter Creek, the stand of cottonwoods a mile south of town, midday tomorrow at the latest." Before Sarah could argue further, he had wheeled his horse around and disappeared into a draw that would take him toward the northern outskirts where the blacksmith's forge stood. Sarah watched him go, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. Then, squaring her shoulders, she urged her own mount toward the eastern edge of town, where Clara Wilson's general store backed up against a small apple orchard. If anyone knew what was happening in Silver Creek, it would be Clara. The forge was silent when Tahoe approached, no smoke rising from its chimney. He dismounted at a safe distance, tethering his horse in a small copse of juniper, then advanced on foot, keeping to cover as much as possible. The building stood dark and empty, tools laid out as if in preparation for work that never began. Tahoe moved silently through the workspace, noting the cold hearth, the untouched anvil. No sign of struggle, but no sign of life either. Adjoining the main forge was a small lean-to sleeping quarters, judging by the narrow cot and meager personal items. Tahoe searched it quickly, finding nothing to indicate where Daniel or the blacksmith might have gone. He was about to leave when a glint of metal caught his eye, something half hidden beneath the thin mattress. Tahoe lifted the corner and found a silver coin. Next to it, a scrap of paper crumpled as if hastily discarded. Smoothing it out, Tahoe recognized Clara Wilson's handwriting directions to Montgomery's cabin, the very place he and Sarah had just left. Daniel had been planning to flee then, but had he succeeded? A sound outside, the soft crunch of boots on gravel, sent Tahoe melting into the shadows behind the door. He drew his knife, waiting as the footsteps approached. A figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the morning light. Too small to be a man, a woman slender and erect despite her years. "You might as well come out," Clara Wilson said calmly. "I know you're there, Mr. Tahoe." Tahoe hesitated, then stepped from the shadows, knife still in hand. "How did you know I'd come here?" "Because you're looking for the boy, as is everyone else in Silver Creek." Clara glanced over her shoulder, ensuring they were alone. "Daniel fled last night. Reed returned with wild stories about Nathan's Apache bastards, 2 of them, he claimed. The boy and you." Tahoe absorbed this, mind racing with implications. "Reed escaped, made it to town. Crawled in just before midnight, half dead but determined." Clara's expression was grim. "He went straight to Nathan private conference. By dawn, Harlow had men combing the hills for Daniel." "And Montgomery?" A shadow crossed Clara's face. "Arrested, charged with aiding fugitives and obstruction of justice." Tahoe cursed under his breath. "Sarah needs to know. She's looking for you." "I'm aware. I saw her riding toward my store." Clara straightened her shawl with a brisk movement. "She won't find me there. Nathan's men are watching it. I've been hiding in the church cellar since Reed's return." "The boy," Tahoe pressed. "Did he make it out of town?" "I believe so. I gave him directions to Montgomery's cabin last night." Tahoe held up the crumpled paper. "These directions—" Clara nodded. "He must have dropped them after memorizing the route as I instructed." "Or he was intercepted before he could leave," Tahoe suggested darkly. "No. Jenkins the blacksmith is raging about the boy's disappearance and some missing coins. Daniel got away." Clara's certainty was reassuring. "But whether he reached the cabin—" "He didn't. We were there until this morning." Clara's shoulders sagged slightly, the first sign of the fear she'd been concealing. "Then he's alone in the hills, a 12-year-old boy with only the vaguest idea of where he's going." Tahoe felt a familiar weight settle in his chest, responsibility for another life, the same weight he'd carried when trying to warn his mother's people about the impending attack, the weight he'd failed to bear adequately then. "I'll find him," he said simply. "Not alone," Clara countered. "Nathan has at least 20 men searching. They're armed and under orders to bring both of you in dead or alive." "Then what do you suggest? I can't leave him out there?" Clara studied him for a moment, as if weighing his worth against some internal standard. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her. "I know these hills as well as anyone," she said. "Better than most. My late husband was a trapper before he opened the store. I accompanied him often." Tahoe raised an eyebrow. "You're offering to help search—" "I'm offering to guide you to where the boy would likely go if he got lost following my directions." Clara's tone was matter-of-fact. "There's an old mine shaft about halfway between here and Montgomery's cabin. James, my husband, used it as a shelter during sudden storms. I showed Daniel its location last summer when he helped deliver supplies to outlying homesteads." Hope flickered. "You think he'd remember?" "Daniel remembers everything he's ever been shown or told," Clara said with quiet confidence. "It's why Jenkins kept him despite his heritage. The boy has a mind like a steel trap." Tahoe made a swift decision. "We need to find Sarah first. Warn her about Montgomery and Reed." "Agreed, but we must be careful. Nathan has men watching all the known exits from town." "Then we make our own exit," Tahoe said grimly. "Where would Sarah go if she found your store empty?" Clara considered this. "The doctor's house, perhaps, or the church. Father Thomas has been sympathetic to Apache causes in the past." "The church, then. It's closer to the southern edge of town, easier to leave unobserved." Clara nodded. "I know a way through the orchards that will keep us out of sight, but we should hurry. Nathan has called a town meeting for noon." "About what?" "A new bounty. $500 for the capture of the Apache who murdered 3 of Harlow's deputies." Clara's eyes held his steadily. "That would be you, according to Reed's revised account of events." Tahoe's jaw tightened. "Of course. There's more. Reed has apparently provided evidence that you're behind the massacre at Dead Horse Canyon, that you led a group of renegade Apache in an attack on your own people to frame Silver Creek mining." The audacity of the lie might have been amusing if it weren't so dangerous. "And people believe this?" "People believe what powerful men tell them to believe," Clara replied simply, "especially when those men control their livelihoods." Tahoe understood the truth of this all too well. "Then we have no time to waste." Together they slipped out the back of the forge and into the orchard beyond 2 unlikely allies bound by a common enemy and a missing boy who might hold the key to unraveling Nathan Blackwood's carefully constructed empire of lies. Sarah approached Clara Wilson's store from the rear using the apple orchard as cover. The back door stood slightly ajar, unusual for the fastidious shopkeeper. Drawing her revolver, Sarah entered cautiously. The storeroom was undisturbed goods neatly stacked on shelves, just as she remembered from her infrequent supply runs. But something felt wrong, an emptiness, a stillness that suggested abandonment rather than temporary absence. Moving into the main shop, Sarah confirmed her suspicion. The ledger was closed, the till locked. No coffee simmered on the small stove in the corner, though the morning chill would normally have warranted it. Clara had left in a hurry, or been taken. A sound from outside boots on the wooden walkway sent Sarah retreating into the shadows of the storeroom. Through a small window she observed two men approaching the shop's front entrance. One she recognized as Peters, one of Harlow's deputies. The other was unfamiliar, a hard-faced stranger with a rifle slung across his back. "Still closed," Peters remarked, peering through the front window. "No sign of the old woman since yesterday?" "Nathan won't be pleased," the stranger replied. "He wants everyone at that meeting, no exceptions." "Clara Wilson's always been stubborn," Peters said with a shrug. "Probably shut herself up at home after that business with the Apache boy." Sarah stiffened. Apache boy. "Daniel. Whole town's going crazy over a half-breed kid," the stranger muttered. "First Reed dragging himself in with wild stories about Blackwood's bastards, then the doctor getting arrested, now a manhunt for a blacksmith's apprentice. This place is cursed." "Watch your mouth," Peters warned. "Nathan Blackwood built Silver Creek from nothing. Without him, we'd all be scratching in the dirt like savages." The men moved on, their voices fading as they continued down the street. Sarah remained motionless, processing what she'd overheard. Reed had escaped and made it to town. Montgomery was arrested. And now Daniel was missing, presumably fled or in hiding. Everything was unraveling faster than she'd anticipated. A town meeting called by Nathan. That would explain the horses she'd seen gathered outside the mining office. Nathan consolidating his position, ensuring everyone heard his version of events before any contrary evidence could emerge. Sarah needed to find allies quickly. With Montgomery imprisoned and Clara missing, her options were limited. The church, perhaps Father Thomas, had always treated her with kindness, even after most of Silver Creek had written her off as a madwoman. Decision made, she slipped out the back door of the store and into the orchard, keeping low among the apple trees. The church stood at the far end of town, its small steeple visible above the surrounding buildings. Reaching it unseen would be challenging but not impossible if she used the network of alleys and back gardens. Sarah had made it halfway there when a hand closed around her arm, yanking her behind a woodpile. She whirled, revolver raised, only to find herself face to face with Tahoe. Clara Wilson stood beside him, finger pressed to her lips in a warning gesture. "Thank God," Sarah breathed, lowering her weapon. "I thought you'd been captured." "Not yet," Tahoe replied grimly. "But it's only a matter of time if we stay in town. Reed's back. He's turned everything around, claiming I led the massacre, that you're harboring a murderer." "I know. I overheard Harlow's men." Sarah turned to Clara. "They said Montgomery's been arrested." Clara nodded, her usually composed features tight with worry. "Last night. He's being held at the sheriff's office on charges of aiding fugitives." "We need to get him out," Sarah said immediately. "Not possible," Clara countered. "The office is guarded by at least 6 men, and that's not our most pressing concern." She glanced at Tahoe. "Tell her about Daniel." Briefly, Tahoe explained about the missing boy, the directions to Montgomery's cabin, and Clara's theory about the abandoned mine shaft. "If Harlow's men find him first—" Sarah didn't need to finish the thought. "Exactly," Clara said. "We need to locate him before the search parties do. The mine is our best hope." Sarah considered their options. Entering the hills with a manhunt already underway would be dangerous, but leaving Daniel to his fate was unthinkable. "What about Reed? What exactly has he told Nathan?" "Everything and nothing," Clara replied cryptically. "He's confirmed Tahoe is Nathan's son, but claimed it was you who discovered this and are using it to blackmail Nathan. According to Reed, you invented the massacre story to discredit Silver Creek mining and force Nathan to acknowledge Tahoe as his heir." Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity. "And people believe this." "People believe what benefits them to believe," Clara said with the weariness of long experience. "The copper deposits in the eastern hills promise jobs prosperity. No one wants to look too closely at the cost." "So we have no allies in Silver Creek," Sarah concluded. "Few," Clara admitted. "Father Thomas, perhaps. A handful of others who harbor private grievances against Nathan, but none who would openly oppose him." "Then we do this ourselves." Tahoe stated flatly. Find Daniel. Secure evidence of the massacre. Force a reckoning. Sarah nodded, decision crystallizing. Clara, can you get word to Montgomery somehow? Let him know we're still fighting. My sister brings him meals. She can pass a message. Tell him to hold strong. We'll clear his name when we return. Clara studied Sarah's face, reading the determination there. You intend to confront Nathan directly? Eventually, yes. But first we find Daniel. Then we should go now, Tahoe urged. Nathan's meeting starts at noon. Most of the town will be there, our best chance to slip away unnoticed. They moved carefully through the orchard toward the southern edge of town, Clara leading the way through paths known only to longtime residents. The church loomed to their right, its bell tower standing sentinel over the small community. As they passed, the doors opened and Father Thomas emerged, his aging figure silhouetted against the dim interior. He paused, squinting in their direction, then deliberately turned away, offering neither assistance nor alarm. Small mercies, Sarah thought. At least he wasn't actively hindering their escape. They reached the edge of town without incident, collecting Tahoe's horse from its hiding place in the junipers. Sarah's mount waited where she'd left it, grazing peacefully among the scrub oak. The mine is about 5 miles northeast, Clara said, pointing toward a jagged ridgeline in the distance. Follow the dry creek bed until you reach a stand of 3 dead pines. The entrance is in the rock face beyond them, partially hidden by brush. You're not coming? Sarah asked, surprised. Clara shook her head. I can do more good here. Monitor the search parties, gather information, and someone needs to look after Montgomery. Sarah couldn't argue with the logic, though. Leaving the older woman behind felt wrong somehow. Be careful. If Nathan suspects you've helped us. Nathan Blackwood has underestimated me for 30 years, Clara replied with a hint of steel in her voice. I see no reason to correct his misconception now. Tahoe extended his hand to the shopkeeper, a gesture of respect rare from an Apache to a white person. My people would call you a woman of strong medicine. Clara accepted the handshake with dignity. My late husband would have called me stubborn as a mule. Either way, I'll do what needs doing. She turned to Sarah. Bring the boy back safely, and if you can bring the truth with him. With that, she slipped back toward town, a deceptively frail figure whose appearance belied the courage it contained. Sarah and Tahoe mounted their horses, turning northeast toward the distant ridgeline, and whatever awaited them there, a lost boy pursuing search parties and the uncertain promise of sanctuary in an abandoned mine shaft. Behind them, Silver Creek's church bell began to toll, summoning the townspeople to Nathan's meeting and whatever new lies he had crafted to protect his empire. Daniel huddled deeper into the narrow crevice, pulling his thin jacket tighter against the morning chill. He'd been hiding in the abandoned mine shaft since before dawn, having stumbled upon it more by luck than memory after hours of wandering in the darkness. Clara's directions had made sense in the safety of her store. In the nighttime forest, with fear clouding his thoughts and Reed's words echoing in his mind, they had become a confusing jumble that led him not to Montgomery's cabin, but to this forgotten hole in the mountainside. Still, it was shelter, protection from both the elements and the men he could hear searching the valleys below, voices calling his name with false concern, horses crashing through underbrush, the occasional crack of a rifle fired to signal a change in direction. They were drawing closer. Daniel knew he couldn't remain hidden much longer. The mine shaft extended deep into the mountain, but venturing further without light was too dangerous. Rockfalls had already partially blocked the tunnel less than 50 feet in, leaving only this front section as a viable hiding place. His stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since the previous afternoon. The package Clara had given him contained jerky and hardtack enough for perhaps 2 days if carefully rationed. After that, Daniel pushed the thought away. After that, he would either have found Montgomery's cabin or been captured. No point worrying beyond those 2 possibilities. A sound outside, not voices or horses, but the soft scuff of leather on stone, froze him mid-breath. Someone was approaching the mine entrance, moving cautiously. Daniel pressed himself deeper into the crevice, one hand closing around the small knife Clara had included in her package. It was a poor weapon against guns, but it was all he had. Filtered sunlight from the entrance dimmed as a figure filled the opening, tall, broad-shouldered, silhouetted against the light. For a heart-stopping moment, Daniel thought it was Reed, somehow having tracked him despite his injured leg. Then the figure spoke, voice low and measured. "Daniel, are you here?" Not Reed. Someone else. Someone who knew his name but didn't shout it like the search parties. Daniel remained silent, unsure whether to reveal himself. The figure took another step inside, eyes adjusting to the dimness. "I'm Tahoe. I have your mother's medallion." The medallion. The Apache medicine charm his mother had always worn had placed around his own neck when fever nearly took him at age 5, claiming it had healing powers beyond white medicine. Daniel had cried when it disappeared after her death, assumed one of the other women at the brothel had stolen it. To hear it mentioned now by this stranger. "Prove it," he whispered, still concealed in his crevice. Tahoe reached into his shirt, withdrawing something that caught the faint light. A silver disc suspended on a leather cord, its surface etched with symbols Daniel recognized instantly: the bear for strength, the arrow for protection, the crescent moon for feminine power. His mother's medallion, identical to the one she had worn every day of his life with her. Daniel emerged slowly from his hiding place, knife still clutched in his hand. "Where did you find it?" Tahoe's expression remained neutral, though his eyes, dark, watchful, assessed Daniel carefully. "At a place called Dead Horse Canyon, among graves." "Graves." Daniel's voice faltered. "My mother is buried in Silver Creek, behind the church." "This belonged to another," Tahoe replied gently. "Someone who carried it to honor your mother, perhaps, or to protect a child." Before Daniel could respond, another figure appeared at the mine entrance, a woman, rifle in hand. "Riders coming," she said tersely. "At least 4 moving fast." Tahoe nodded, decision made. "Daniel, I'm Sarah Blackwood. This is Tahoe. We've come to help you, but there's no time for explanations now. Will you trust us?" Trust. Such a simple word for such an enormous leap of faith. Daniel hesitated, weighing his options. Return to Silver Creek, and whatever punishment awaited him for running away, or follow these strangers who possessed his mother's medallion and spoke of graves and protection. In the end, it wasn't trust that decided him, but practicality. Even if these people meant him harm, they couldn't do worse than Reed or Nathan Blackwood's men would. "Yes," he said, straightening to his full height, unimpressive for a 12-year-old, but the best he could manage. "I'll go with you." Relief flickered across Sarah's face. "Good. We have horses, but they're hidden in the ravine below. We'll need to move quickly and quietly to reach them before the search party arrives." Daniel nodded, tucking the knife into his belt and gathering his meager possessions. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe," Tahoe answered, though his expression suggested such a place might not exist. "Somewhere we can talk freely." They exited the mine shaft cautiously, Sarah taking the lead while Tahoe brought up the rear, Daniel between them. The boy moved with surprising stealth, placing his feet carefully to avoid loose stones or breaking twigs. Sarah led them not down the obvious path but along a narrow game trail that skirted the ridge. Below, in the broader valley, dust rose from approaching riders, Nathan's men closing in on the mine shaft with methodical precision. "They know," Tahoe murmured. "Someone told them where to look." Sarah's expression hardened. "We need to reach the horses before they cut off our escape route." They quickened their pace, half jogging along the precarious trail. Daniel kept up admirably, his smaller size an advantage on the narrow path. They had nearly reached the ravine where the horses were hidden when the first shot rang out, a rifle crack that echoed across the hills. The bullet struck rock several feet to their left, sending stone chips flying. "Down!" Tahoe pushed Daniel into the shelter of a boulder, drawing his revolver in the same motion. Sarah dropped to one knee, rifle raised, scanning for the shooter. "There." She pointed to a rider on the opposite ridge, too far for accurate pistol fire, but well within rifle range. Before she could take aim, more shots followed, a barrage that pinned them behind their meager cover. "They're not trying to hit us," Tahoe realized. They're keeping us pinned until the others arrive. Sarah nodded grimly. The horses are just down this slope, maybe 200 yards. If we make a run for it, we'd be cut down before we reach them, Tahoe finished. We need a distraction. Daniel, pressed against the boulder, suddenly spoke up. There's another way down. I saw it when I was hiding earlier, a sort of chimney in the rock face, narrow but passable. Both adults turned to him in surprise. Where? Sarah asked. Daniel pointed to a nearly invisible crevice about 50 yards along the ridge. It leads all the way to the bottom. I almost fell into it in the dark. Tahoe studied the feature with a tracker's eye. It might work. For the boy, certainly. Maybe for you. He nodded to Sarah's slender frame. Not for me. Sarah understood immediately what he was suggesting. No, we stay together. If we stay together, we all get captured, Tahoe countered. I can hold them here, give you time to reach the horses. And then what? We leave you. You take Daniel to safety, to the territorial capital if necessary, someone who will listen about the massacre, about Nathan's crimes. Sarah shook her head vehemently. I'm not leaving you to die on this ridge. Another volley of shots peppered their position, closer this time. The search party was advancing, using the gunfire as cover. It's not a request, Tahoe said, his voice taking on an edge of command. The boy is what matters now. He's proof of everything, Nathan's secret son, just like me. Living evidence that can't be buried or denied. Daniel watched this exchange with wide eyes, understanding dawning despite his youth. You're my brother. Tahoe's expression softened slightly. Half-brother. Same father, different mothers. Both Apache women Nathan Blackwood used and discarded. The revelation seemed to strike Daniel with physical force. He sat back against the boulder, absorbing this new reality, this connection to a man he'd seen around town his entire life, but who had never acknowledged him. Nathan Blackwood is my father, he said, testing the words. Yes. Sarah confirmed, her attention divided between the approaching riders and the painful truth being revealed. And he'll do anything to keep that secret, including kill us all if he gets the chance. The gunfire intensified, chunks of rock flying as bullets struck increasingly close to their position. They were running out of time. Go, Tahoe urged again. The chimney. Now, I'll cover you. I'll cover. Sarah met his gaze, 1,000 unspoken words passing between them in that moment. Regret for what might have been, respect for what was, determination for what must be done. I'll come back for you, she said finally. I know. Tahoe's smile was brief but genuine. Now go. Sarah grabbed Daniel's hand, pulling him into a crouching run toward the crevice he had indicated. Tahoe provided covering fire, the revolver's reports nearly lost amid the barrage from the search party. The chimney was, as Daniel had described, a narrow vertical shaft formed by erosion or some ancient seismic event. Sarah went first, testing handholds before signaling Daniel to follow. The descent was treacherous, loose rock, narrow passages that scraped skin from knuckles and elbows. Above them, the gunfire continued, unabated, punctuated by shouts as the search party closed in on Tahoe's position. They were halfway down when Sarah heard a different kind of shout, pain rather than command. Tahoe had been hit. She hesitated, every instinct screaming to go back to help him. We can't, Daniel said quietly from just above her. Not now. He's buying us time. The wisdom in the boy's young voice steadied her. Sarah nodded once, then continued the descent with renewed urgency. They reached the bottom of the ravine, breathless and scraped raw but alive. The horses waited where they'd left them, tethered to a juniper and mercifully undiscovered by the search party. Sarah boosted Daniel onto her mount, then swung up behind him. Hold tight, she instructed, turning the horse toward the narrow end of the ravine, away from Silver Creek, away from the gunfire still echoing from the ridge above. But Tahoe, Daniel began, is counting on us to escape, Sarah finished firmly, to make his sacrifice mean something. With that, she urged the horse forward, Tahoe's mount following on a lead rope. They rode hard, following the ravine until it widened into a broader valley, then cutting east toward the territorial border. Behind them, the gunfire had stopped. Whether that meant Tahoe had been captured or killed, Sarah couldn't know. She could only honor his choice by ensuring Daniel reached safety and that Nathan Blackwood finally faced justice for his crimes. The gray cliffs rose stark against the evening sky, their weathered faces reflecting the last crimson light of sunset. Sarah reined in her exhausted horse, surveying the natural fortress before them. They had ridden hard for hours, following game trails and dry creek beds, doubling back occasionally to confuse any pursuit. Now, as darkness approached, they needed shelter. The cliffs offered caves defensible positions, water from the small spring that bubbled from their base. "We'll stop here for the night," she told Daniel, who sat before her in the saddle, his small body rigid with exhaustion and unspoken fear. The boy nodded, too tired for words. They dismounted, Sarah lifting him down when his legs threatened to buckle beneath him. "Rest," she instructed, settling him on a flat rock near the spring. "I'll see to the horses and find us some shelter." Daniel obeyed without argument, accepting the canteen she offered and drinking deeply. Sarah tended to the horses, quickly unsaddling them and letting them drink from the spring before tethering them where patches of grass grew between the rocks. A shallow cave in the cliff face provided adequate shelter, deep enough to protect from the elements, shallow enough to allow quick escape if necessary. Sarah gathered what little firewood the barren landscape offered, building a small, nearly smokeless fire just inside the cave mouth. Only when these essential tasks were complete did she allow herself to truly look at Daniel, to see Nathan Blackwood's second son clearly for the first time. The resemblance was there, subtle but undeniable. The same proud nose, the same set to the jaw. But where Nathan's features conveyed arrogance and cold authority, Daniel's held a quiet dignity beyond his years. "You should eat," she said, offering him jerky and hardtack from their dwindling supplies. Daniel accepted the food, mechanically chewing without apparent taste. "Is Tahoe dead?" he asked suddenly. Sarah settled beside him, her own weariness washing over her in a wave. "I don't know. He's skilled, resourceful. He might have escaped." "But you don't believe that?" "Perceptive child. I believe he made a choice. To protect you. To ensure Nathan's crimes are exposed." Daniel was silent for a long moment, processing this. "Because I'm proof. Living proof that Nathan Blackwood has Apache sons." "Yes. And the other proof, the massacre Tahoe mentioned." Sarah hesitated, uncertain how much to burden the boy with. But Daniel's steady gaze demanded truth, not comforting lies. "Nathan ordered the murder of 43 Apache people 3 months ago," she said finally. "Men, women, children. Because they lived on land that contained copper deposits he wanted, and because some of them might have known about his relationship with your mother." Daniel's eyes widened, horror replacing exhaustion. "He killed people to keep me a secret." "To keep both of you secret," Sarah corrected gently. "To protect his reputation, his business, his standing in society." The boy looked down at his hands, small, calloused from forge work, but unmistakably bearing the longer fingers characteristic of the Blackwood men. "What happens now?" he asked, voice small against the vastness of the desert night. It was the question Sarah had been asking herself throughout their desperate flight. What next? Where could they go that Nathan's influence couldn't reach? Who would believe their accusations against the territory's most powerful man? "We head for Phoenix," she decided, the plan forming as she spoke. "The territorial governor maintains an office there. We present our evidence, Clara's ledger, your existence, my testimony about Reed's confession. Will it be enough?" Sarah wished she could offer certainty. "I don't know, but it's our best hope for justice." Daniel nodded, accepting this tentative plan with the same quiet dignity he'd shown throughout their ordeal. "You should rest too," he said, surprising her with his concern. "I'll keep watch for a while." Despite everything, Sarah smiled. "A few hours. Wake me if you hear anything unusual." She settled on her bedroll near the cave entrance, revolver within easy reach. Though exhaustion pulled at her, sleep remained elusive. Her mind circled constantly to Tahoe, to their brief, intense connection forged in danger and common purpose. She had left him behind. A necessary choice perhaps, but one that burned like acid in her chest. Eventually, fitful sleep claimed her dreams filled with gunfire and falling rocks, with Nathan's cold smile and Matthew's empty eyes. She woke to Daniel's hand on her shoulder, his voice urgent in her ear. "Riders coming. At least 6. Sarah was instantly alert, reaching for her weapon as she moved to the cave entrance. Dawn had broken, pale light spilling across the rocky landscape. In the distance, dust rose from approaching horses, still small but moving with purpose. "How did they find us?" Daniel whispered, crouching beside her. "Trackers," Sarah replied grimly. "Nathan employs the best." She surveyed their position, calculating options. "We need to reach higher ground, the cliff top." Daniel glanced up at the sheer rock face dubiously. "Can we climb it?" "We have to try. Our only advantage is position." Sarah was already gathering their essential supplies, ammunition, canteen, what remained of their food. The horses will have to fend for themselves. They began the ascent immediately, Sarah leading the way up a natural chimney similar to the one that had saved them the previous day. Daniel followed closely, his smaller size an advantage in the narrow confines. The climb was arduous, the rock face crumbling in places, offering precarious handholds that threatened to give way. Twice Sarah had to reach down and haul Daniel up particularly difficult sections. They reached the top as the riders approached the spring below 6 men, as Daniel had counted. Sarah recognized Ellis Reed among them, somehow managing to ride despite his shattered knee. Beside him was Jenkins the blacksmith, and 4 others she didn't know, hard-faced men with rifles and the cold eyes of professional manhunters. Sarah pulled Daniel back from the cliff edge before they could be spotted. "Stay low," she whispered. "They'll check the cave first." They crawled to a position behind a large boulder that offered both concealment and a clear view of the approaches to the cliff top. Sarah checked her rifle, 5 rounds remaining. The revolver held 4. 9 shots against 6 armed men, poor odds at best. Below, voices carried in the still morning air. "They're here," Reed's distinctive rasp. "Fresh tracks by the spring." "Cave," another voice responded. "Jenkins Peters, check it." Sarah watched as 2 men dismounted, approaching the cave with weapons drawn. The others remained on horseback, scanning the surrounding area. "Nothing," Jenkins called after a moment. "Bedrolls, some supplies. They left in a hurry." Reed cursed the sound, carrying clearly. "They can't have gone far on foot. Spread out, search the base of the cliff. They must have tried to circle around." Sarah permitted herself a small smile. Reed was assuming they'd fled horizontally, not vertically. It might buy them precious time. The hunters dispersed, 3 heading north along the cliff base, 3 south. Reed remained at the spring, his injured leg apparently preventing him from participating in the search. "What now?" Daniel whispered. "We wait," Sarah replied. "Let them exhaust themselves searching in the wrong places. Once they're far enough away, we'll head east toward Phoenix." It was a desperate plan, relying heavily on luck and the vast emptiness of the Arizona desert. But it was all they had. They remained motionless as the sun climbed higher, its heat intensifying on the exposed cliff top. Hours passed. The searchers returned periodically to report their lack of success, only to be sent out again by an increasingly furious Reed. By midday, tension had clearly developed among the hunters. Sarah could hear raised voices, accusations of incompetence, Reed's threats to report their failure to Nathan personally. "They're getting desperate," she murmured to Daniel. "Careless. Good for us." The boy nodded, his young face showing remarkable composure despite their dire situation. "How much longer do we wait?" Before Sarah could answer, a new sound reached them, hoofbeats approaching from the west, multiple riders moving fast. Both Sarah and Daniel pressed lower behind their boulder, watching as a cloud of dust resolved into 3 horsemen galloping toward the spring where Reed and his men had established their base. "More hunters," Daniel whispered, but Sarah had recognized one of the riders. "No," she breathed, hardly daring to believe. "Look." The new arrivals reined in their horses at the spring. 2 were Apache warriors, their distinctive headbands and weapons unmistakable even at this distance. The third was Tahoe, alive, wounded, a bandage visible around his left arm, but unmistakably wonderfully alive. Daniel's eyes widened. How? I don't know, Sarah replied, joy and confusion warring within her. But we need to help them. They're outnumbered. Below, Reed and his men had formed a defensive line, weapons drawn. Words were exchanged too distant to hear clearly, but the hostility was evident in every rigid posture, every raised rifle. Sarah made a swift decision. Stay here, she instructed Daniel. No matter what happens, don't show yourself unless I call for you. Before the boy could protest, she had moved to a new position at the cliff edge, rifle raised, sighting down the barrel at Reed's exposed back. The confrontation below had escalated, Reed gesturing angrily while Tahoe sat his horse with deceptive calm, the two Apache warriors flanking him like silent sentinels. Reed's voice carried suddenly clear in a moment of wind shift. Don't care what tribal nonsense you're claiming. The boy belongs to Nathan Blackwood, and you're both going back to Silver Creek to face justice. Tahoe's response was too low to hear, but whatever he said caused Reed to reach for his pistol. Sarah fired. The bullet struck the ground at Reed's feet, sending dust and stone fragments flying. All heads turned upward, searching for the source of the shot. That was a warning, Sarah called, her voice echoing off the cliff face. The next one goes through Reed's heart. Relief and something more complex flashed across Tahoe's face as he spotted her position. The Apache warriors remained impassive, though their hands moved imperceptibly closer to their weapons. Sarah Blackwood, Reed called back, fury evident despite the distance. Always interfering in matters that don't concern you. 43 dead Apache concern me, she replied. Nathan's secret sons concern me. Justice concerns me. Reed laughed, the sound ugly and strained. Justice? There's no justice for Apache lovers and half-breeds in this territory. Only rope. Perhaps, Sarah acknowledged. But Nathan will hang beside us once the truth is known. Reed's posture changed subtly, a coiling of preparation. You assume you'll live long enough to tell your version of events. It happened with shocking speed. Reed drew and fired in one fluid motion, the bullet striking the cliff face inches from Sarah's position. His men followed suit, a barrage of gunfire forcing her to duck behind the boulder. Below, chaos erupted. Tahoe and his Apache companions charged Reed's men, the clash of bodies and horses creating a swirling dust cloud that obscured individual figures. Sarah returned fire, carefully picking her shots, aware of her limited ammunition. One of Reed's men fell from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. Another ducked behind the horses for cover. The battle seemed to hang in suspension, neither side able to gain decisive advantage. Tahoe and his warriors were outnumbered, but fighting with the ferocity of men with nothing to lose. Reed's hired guns had superior firepower but were caught off guard by the coordinated attack. Then a new element entered the fray. Daniel, ignoring Sarah's instructions, had worked his way to a position directly above Reed. As Sarah watched in horror, the boy balanced on the cliff edge, a large rock clutched in his hands. "Daniel, no!" she shouted, but her voice was lost in the gunfire and shouts from below. The boy hesitated only a moment, then dropped the rock. It fell like judgment from above, striking Reed squarely on his injured leg. The mercenary's scream cut through the chaos of battle, a sound of pure agony that momentarily froze everyone in place. Reed collapsed, the shattered knee now completely destroyed by the impact. Blood pooled beneath him as he writhed on the ground, curses giving way to incoherent moans. The distraction was all Tahoe needed. He and his companions pressed their advantage, disarming 2 of Reed's remaining men, while the others broke and fled, abandoning their employer to whatever fate awaited him. Sarah scrambled back from the cliff edge, reaching Daniel just as the boy prepared to drop another rock. "Enough," she said, pulling him gently away. "It's over." The fight seemed to leave Daniel all at once. He sagged against her, suddenly just an exhausted, frightened child rather than a vengeful warrior. "I had to do something," he whispered. "He was going to kill you. Kill Tahoe." Sarah held him close, feeling his small body tremble against her. "I know. You were brave, very brave." They made their way carefully down the cliff face, using a different route than their ascent, a natural staircase of sorts that wound down the southern face. By the time they reached the bottom, Tahoe had secured Reed and the wounded mercenary, while his Apache companions had retrieved the horses that had scattered during the fight. Tahoe dismounted when he saw them approaching, his face revealing more emotion than Sarah had yet witnessed from him: relief, joy, a fierce pride, as his gaze fell on Daniel. "You're alive," Sarah said, the simple words inadequate to express the surge of feeling that accompanied them. "Barely," Tahoe acknowledged, gesturing to his bandaged arm and a fresh wound across his ribs. "The Apache found me after the search party left me for dead, brought me to their healer, and then came looking for us," Sarah finished. Tahoe nodded. "They have their own reasons to want Nathan Blackwood to face justice." Sarah's gaze shifted to Reed, who lay propped against a rock face, gray with pain and hatred. "What do we do with him?" "Take him to Phoenix," Tahoe replied, "along with these." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a leather portfolio. "Letters, between Nathan and my mother, and a birth certificate with both our names on it. Montgomery told me where to find them before he was arrested." Sarah took the portfolio with reverent hands. "How did you get these?" A ghost of a smile touched Tahoe's lips. "Esther Redmond, the housekeeper. Apparently she never approved of how Nathan treated my mother. More allies than they'd realized. More people unwilling to let Nathan's crimes remain buried." "Phoenix, then," Sarah agreed. "All of us. With Reed and the evidence." Tahoe's gaze shifted to Daniel, who stood slightly apart, watching this exchange with the wary attention of a child accustomed to adults making decisions about his fate without his input. "All of us," Tahoe confirmed, moving to stand before the boy. "If that's what you want, Daniel." Daniel looked up at his half-brother, this warrior who carried his mother's medallion and his father's blood. "What happens after Phoenix, after everything?" It was the question none of them had fully confronted. The after. The rebuilding that would follow the necessary destruction. "That's for you to decide," Tahoe said quietly. "You have family among the Apache if you wish it. Or," he glanced at Sarah, "or you could come with me," she offered, surprising herself with how right it felt. "My homestead is empty. Too empty. It could use a boy's laughter again." Daniel considered this, his young face solemn with the weight of choice. "Could Tahoe come too?" "Sometimes." Sarah met Tahoe's gaze over the boy's head. Something unspoken passed between them. Possibility, potential. A future not yet written, but suddenly imaginable. "Yes," she said simply. "Tahoe would be welcome. Any time." The Apache warrior inclined his head, acknowledgment and perhaps promise in the gesture. "First Phoenix," he reminded them. "First justice." "Justice." Daniel echoed the word, sounding strange but necessary on his young lips. They prepared to depart as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Reed was secured across a spare horse, his wounds treated as best they could manage. The wounded mercenary, deemed unlikely to cause trouble, was given a canteen and directions back to Silver Creek. As they mounted their horses, Tahoe handed something to Daniel, the silver medallion hanging from its leather cord. "Your mother's protection," he said. "It belongs with you now." Daniel accepted it reverently, slipping it over his head where it rested against his chest. "Thank you." The small caravan set out eastward toward Phoenix and whatever justice the territorial governor might provide. Behind them, the gray cliffs stood silent witness to the battle that had been fought in their shadow, one small victory in a larger war for truth. Sarah rode alongside Tahoe with Daniel between them. The boy sat straight in his saddle despite his exhaustion, chin raised, eyes fixed on the horizon ahead. "Will it be enough?" she asked quietly, echoing Daniel's question from the previous night. "The evidence, the testimony, your existence as Nathan's son's Tahoe," considered this, his gaze never leaving the path ahead. "Perhaps not. Power protects itself. Money silences inconvenient truths. Then why fight?" The question contained no defeat, only genuine curiosity. "Because violence doesn't come from blood," Tahoe replied, echoing words Sarah had heard him speak in fever dreams. "It comes from greed disguised as law." "And forgiveness doesn't erase wounds," Sarah continued, remembering, "but it stops them from bleeding." Tahoe glanced at her, surprised and perhaps impressed that she had remembered his delirious philosophizing. "Humanity only matters if we're willing to pay for it," he finished quietly. Between them, Daniel listened, absorbing these fragments of wisdom earned through blood and loss. His small hand reached up to touch the medallion at his chest, a tangible connection to his mother, to his heritage, to the future being forged in this unlikely alliance. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. Ahead lay Phoenix, the territorial governor, the uncertain promise of justice. Behind them lay Silver Creek, Nathan Blackwood, 43 graves in a forgotten canyon. And somewhere in between, in this moment of movement of purpose of 3 damaged souls, finding unexpected connection, lay the possibility of healing. Not a happy ending. Not yet. Perhaps never entirely. But a beginning with enough hope to sustain the journey. Sarah urged her horse forward, Tahoe matching her pace. Daniel between them, protected on both sides. Together they rode toward whatever waited beyond the horizon, 3 silhouettes against the setting sun, carrying truth like a flame through gathering darkness. Clara Wilson stood at her store window watching as Nathan Blackwood's body was carried toward the undertakers. Not a grand funeral procession, just 4 somber men bearing a plain pine coffin and a handful of townspeople who had emerged from their homes out of curiosity rather than respect. How quickly the mighty fell when their foundations crumbled. 3 months had passed since Sarah, Tahoe, and Daniel had left for Phoenix with their evidence and their prisoner. 3 months of revelations, accusations, testimony before the territorial governor. In the end, Nathan hadn't faced the justice they'd sought, not in a courtroom at least. A bullet fired by his own hand had rendered legal proceedings unnecessary. His suicide note, brief and unrepentant, had admitted nothing while simultaneously confirming everything. Silver Creek was dying now. The copper deposits that had promised renewal tied up in legal battles between the territorial government and Nathan's eastern investors. Montgomery, exonerated and released from jail, had already departed for California, his faith in the town irrevocably broken. Clara would stay. Someone needed to remember what had happened here, the truth beneath the lies that had built and ultimately destroyed Silver Creek. The procession passed her window. Clara didn't bow her head or offer any gesture of respect. Instead, she turned away, moving to the back of her store, where a letter lay open on her desk. Sarah's handwriting describing life on the homestead with Daniel, the slow process of healing Tahoe's occasional visits, bringing news of his efforts to secure proper burial and memorial for the massacre victims. Not a happy ending, Sarah had written, but a beginning with enough hope to sustain the journey. Clara folded the letter carefully and placed it in a box with the others' testimonies to truth that would endure long after Nathan Blackwood's name had faded from memory. Outside, the coffin disappeared into the undertaker's shop. The small crowd dispersed, returning to the business of survival in a town built on sand and secrets. Clara Wilson opened her ledger, picked up her pen, and began the day's accounts. Life continued. Truth endured. Justice, in its own imperfect way, had been served. It would have to be enough.